Order, order. Can I welcome our first member of the panel, our first witness on our first panel on this one-off session that we're holding to investigate as a committee the events surrounding the decision to ban away fans at the Aston Villa Maccabi Tel Aviv game. Before we start, there are some declarations of interest. I will declare that I am an officer and member of the Conservative Friends of Israel.
I'm a member of the Labour Friends of Israel.
I've received a donation of £2,000 from the Lib Dem Friends of Israel.
Peter?
And I'm a Jewish Labour MP.
Let's start off. We very much welcome you, Lord Mann, for appearing. Would you just like to introduce yourself and then we'll get into questions?
Yes, John Mann, Lord Mann. I'm the independent advisor to the government, as I have been. I'm on my 5th Prime Minister.
You are on your 5th Prime Minister. Right, we're going to kick off with questions and I'd like to bring in Peter Prinsley.
Great. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. So my first question is, what do you see as your role in this issue?
My role is to advise government on anti-Semitism, and I'm independent, so I'm free to do it how I choose, and government's free to keep appointing me or not, and they have done so far. And when I saw what happened in Amsterdam, I thought there was a danger in this country that it would lead to various consequences, and I'd rather boldly say I've been proven almost exactly correct in terms of what has happened. So I went to Amsterdam. I also went to Rotterdam and Utrecht. I met everybody involved and I talked about what had happened in a huge amount of detail and what were they going to do to prevent such a thing happening again in the future.
So you'd been making representations to the government about the risk of the Israeli football plans coming in?
I wrote a report when I came back.
Yeah.
That was sent across government. It was sent to the police. I had some discussions in relation to it. One I identified as the key problem in Amsterdam. A, there'd been a problem, and B, it had been greatly exaggerated, in my opinion. That the facts bear me out on that. But therefore, because it had been greatly exaggerated all round, if an Israeli team was to play a team in the UK at football, there would be problems. And I identified a range of different scenarios in advance of this fixture. One of them specifically was Aston Villa playing an Israeli team.
Right. So when it was actually established that the Maccabi Tel Aviv were coming to play in Birmingham, did you then make further representations to the government about that?
Yes, I'd made representations during the year. Right. I'd sent my document. It went to Downing Street, it went to the Home Office, it went to DCMS, it went to the police, suggesting what might happen in that scenario and giving some advice. And I've sent a copy of that document, I believe you have that. And when the fixture, I think it was 29th of August, this precise fixture, which was exactly one that I identified as the highest risk, because of the nature of the football stadium, the nature of the community, the diversity of the community, and the numbers of fans who support Maccabi Tel Aviv, I tried to press buttons in order to mitigate and solve the problems that I thought would occur.
So from what I'm hearing is the government must have been well aware, or somebody in the government was well aware of the likely difficulties before the decision was made to ban.
I met with civil servants.
Yeah.
Yes, and I made a specific proposal immediately to everybody, which was that the time of this fixture should be brought forward, and very explicitly, because I identified one of the problems would be that Israeli fans from Tel Aviv, with the 8 o'clock fixed kick-off, had to stay in Birmingham overnight and therefore whoever's causing whatever kind of problems, the conflict and the issues of dealing with it would be far worse if you had visiting fans staying overnight, whereas an earlier kick-off would allow people to come from London and get back.
So given that what happened did happen, what do you think about the government's response to what happened?
I think government needs to have a clear plan for problems that are identifiable in advance. I think football needs to have a clearer plan, and I think policing needs to have a clearer plan. Everything that happened, in my view, was highly predictable. And not the specific of banning the Israeli fans, but the public interest. Because you have a group of people who very openly and democratically want to prohibit Israeli clubs, football clubs or other sports clubs, playing in this country. So there's going to be a political protest, and that's not just the situation in this country. And you have an Israeli club that's got supporters, and they're going to want to play. So the potential for this being a different kind of problem was obvious to me, and I'd have thought obvious to everyone.
Yeah. So my final question on the basis of what you said is it your opinion that at some point there was a political interference in the decision to ban the supporters? And was this the result of a prejudiced assessment of the advice and information?
Pretty long answer to go through all of that. I don't think I was surprised at the decision to ban the fans. I don't think that was the most appropriate decision, nor the most sensible decision in the circumstances. That's got nothing to do with politics. That's got to do with the practicalities of how you avoid conflict in a conflict situation. So what I would have done, and what I proposed when it was clear that the change of kick-off time wasn't changing, but I'd have done this anyway, is I would have insisted that the visiting fans, using a traditional, much-used football policing technique, were required to get their tickets to the match on coaches, went on coaches, were searched before they went on coaches, had a police officer on each coach, and were taken in and out of Birmingham under police escort. That's a scenario I'm very familiar with, scenario I've experienced in this country, and that would have been a better solution.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can I just ask, did you have any discussions with local government, or would that not? Does your role only go to national government?
I wrote to Birmingham City Council. I gave them a copy of my report, I believe. Yes, I did, and I wrote them a letter suggesting the idea of fans coming by coach, that was a tried and tested method in advance of their decision making.
Yes.
So do you think they just ignored that?
Well, Birmingham City Council did.
Yes.
That was highly precise. That was, I think I am very familiar with this area of work. I don't know if this is declaring an interest, but I chair a football supporters group. I chair the supporters group at Leeds, and we run more coaches, far more than any other supporters group in England. So I personally often have to deal with the police and sometimes negotiate with the police over problem football matches and getting away fans safely in and out, safely for themselves, the home fans and the local community. So I wasn't coming from this from some intellectual or political perspective, but a pragmatic perspective. That's where I thought Birmingham City Council doesn't have operational policing powers. Safety advisory groups, my understanding of their powers, they have two powers they could use. They could say that there'll be no fans and the licence to hold the fixture will have no spectators, or they could say there will be no event. That's their powers. Everything else, and certainly in my dealings in the past, would be an operational issue for the police. So the City Council, in fact, can't be in a position, they could suggest things, but they can't enforce detail of how away fans are dealt with.
Thank you.
And I have been an away fan at overseas fixtures, and you have to provide your passport, and there are certain conditions about where you're allowed to get off the underground or whatever it might be as to where you're going. So I think you're...
But we also use that in this country.
Exactly.
I could give plenty of examples
Exactly.
of where that happens and has happened.
It's not at all an uncommon thing. You spoke to Home Office officials. Did you have any ministerial
I spoke
engagement?
to DCMS officials.
Sorry, DCMS, right.
I had no response from the Home Office.
Okay, so you didn't speak to Home Office officials
I had
at
no
all?
response. The DCMS officials said they would convene a meeting with the Home Office.
Right.
If they did, I wasn't invited to it.
And any ministerial engagement at all?
After the fixture, I spoke to ministers as well. Not before.
Not before, okay.
After the fixture,
So-
I spoke to
So the
ministers.
timeline is you went to Aston, you produced your report, the report went to the government, Home Office have never responded, DCMS did respond, then when the fixture was announced and you'd identified this as a potentially difficult fixture because of the nature of where the ground is and the stadium and its exits and entry and things like that, that's the issue?
At Aston Villa?
Yeah.
No, Aston Villa is a very straightforward ground to take coaches to. It's one of the easiest.
Yeah.
The distance from the A38, which is dual carriageway at Spaghetti Junction, to the stadium. You see, we send our coaches there, so I know. There's choices where they're parked. If Aston Villa are cooperating, and I should say I spoke to Aston Villa a number of times, and I spoke to Maccabi Tel Aviv a number of times. Both were incredibly cooperative, and I have literally no criticisms. They handled the whole issue maturely and sensibly at every stage. Getting coaches to Aston Villa is straightforward. It's one of the easier grounds to do it to because they have sufficient parking at the stadium and around it. So that was a practical possibility, not just a theoretical one.
It seems to me you're an absolutely uniquely placed individual in this respect, because not only are you the government's anti-Semitism advisor, but you have this great expertise in football and football crowds. And you took a great deal of care before this episode to do everything that was expected of you. You produced some advice which seems to have been ignored. Is that a summary of a fair
The
summary?
role of advisors is to give advice.
I know.
And I should say, I've spoken in Amsterdam at Ajax Football Club on hooligans, ultra groups, football culture, and with Anne Frank House, who have run a campaign called Changing the Chance across Europe. So this kind of work I've been very involved in, including micro discussions in Amsterdam 10 years before this fixture of the football culture, the issue of hooliganism, how that relates to the Jewish community. I could go into infinite detail about it. It's a bit of a distraction, I think, for what you're trying to achieve. But I do have quite a lot of knowledge on the subject, that's, I would say.
El Ribiera.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lord Mayor. You talked about coaches being put on in the UK for similar scenarios, and I wanted to ask if this has ever been done specifically because of threats of racist violence and particular threats to local residents as opposed to people involved in the match.
The issues in relation, when we're dealing with both. When I've negotiated, sometimes it's negotiating, usually it's listening and discussing with the police over football fixtures, the interaction with the local community is absolutely an issue there, because there's the question of how do you separate fans, how many tickets do you get, how do you get in and out, how do you get there safely, how do you avoid a clash between fans, but the interaction with the local community. For example, do you have fans encouraged to go in a city centre before or after a fixture as an away fan? What is the transport from a city centre to a stadium? These are fundamental issues, and the potential clashes or antagonisms could be with people who are going to a football match, but just as easily it could be with locals who, for whatever perspective, feel they have a vested interest in not welcoming you.
And you talk about city centres, and I think about what happened in Amsterdam in particular in terms of where I suppose the fans congregated. And I really want to touch specifically on the issue of the racist violence and the things that were being chanted because of reports of what people like Kick It Out Israel have found Maccabi fans chanting things like, why is school out in Gaza? There are no children there, and death to Arabs. I think the West Midlands police said that one of their main reasons for the ban was that the hooliganism specifically put local residents at threat, totally unconnected to the match. And I was wondering how, I suppose, you thought there were ways to get around that other than, I suppose, specifically banning them in a way that has been done.
We need to differentiate. I've been with the Kick It Out Israel campaign. I've been to clubs in Israel. I've been to Arab clubs. I've been to Jewish-owned clubs. I've been with them to Maccabi Tel Aviv specifically, and looked at the situation there and looked at the Maccabi Tel Aviv derbies. I've been with them to Beitar Jerusalem. I've been with them to Kfar Saknin. So I'm very familiar with their work. I'm very familiar with the issue of chanting, racist chanting and other aggressive chanting. Quite a bit of the chanting in this country these days is very aggressive, horrific chanting that's not racist. I'm not sure how much of a progression that is, because it used to be all racist. But as an example, the so-called Munich song in relation to Manchester United. If you want to cause problems in Manchester, you go sing that song, it causes problems. And it will get a huge reaction. So there is the question of racist chanting and songs. There's a question of racist violence, or any other violence. And I've looked at the intelligence report of the West Midlands Police, and I struggle with some of the intelligence within it, including the intelligence about Amsterdam. And it doesn't concur with the discussions I had in Amsterdam and the facts I saw in Amsterdam. I had the opportunity to look in great detail at who was arrested, the profile of people arrested, where the arrest took place, what the allegations were, later some of them convictions, what happened when and where. I have a copy, and I believe you have a copy, of the statement of facts done by the Chief of Police from Amsterdam. So what happened in Amsterdam, and what actually generally was a very good policing operation, not a very bad policing operation, almost a classical policing operation, helps inform but doesn't fully inform the situation in Birmingham, because there were no arrests for Maccabi Tel Aviv fans attacking local Dutch people. There were none. There is a warrant out for one person at the moment. I don't know the details, but I suspect it's for a violent attack. Now, whether that's on police or a local, I don't know, because the details aren't out. But in terms of the big issue of what happened in Amsterdam, that wasn't the big issue, because that didn't happen. So the suggestion that Maccabi Tel Aviv fans were going around Amsterdam trying to find local people, specifically from the Muslim community, going, quotes, into Muslim areas, didn't happen. That didn't happen. What happened was that the traditional policing techniques, they acted as ultras. The ultra culture is pretty commonplace, whereby you go to a city, you all go together in your colours in the city centre. That happened here. They mixed with Ajax so-called ultras, who were there drinking the day before in the square all day with them. They sing songs, many of them on both sides, hugely objectionable songs, and from the Israeli side, without question, racist songs. Some flares are let off, and that's it. Now, from a policing point of view, they contained, therefore, those visitors, and on the day itself of the fixture, there was one arrest of one Israeli going from the square, and that was clearly behaving improperly in terms of the policing. So one Israeli was arrested. I believe one person on a Palestinian demonstration that was kept separate was arrested at the same time. That was it on the day till after the fixture. So from a policing point of view, I would say, and my observation to this day is, actually Amsterdam police, with 1,200, not 5,000 police officers, handled it extremely well. It then went wrong after the fixture in the evening. I think there are reasons it went wrong. And there are a number of Israelis who were attacked on the street. 5 were hospitalised, none seriously enough to be detained, and around 30 to 40 had minor injuries. That, in football terms, is an issue. It's not a massive, unusual event, but there is no evidence of any local people from the Netherlands having been injured. None.
Yeah. And sorry, just finally, I suppose a lot of it is about risk, and it seems from what the police were saying their actions were, it was about preventing that risk, and the reports that have come out of Amsterdam, despite the arrests, sound quite different. Obviously, we have very specific laws in this country about racism, so if there was a risk of any sort of chanting, racist chanting, anti-Semitic chanting, would it not be expected that we would put certain measures in place to prevent this before it happened?
Potentially, but the laws in Amsterdam, Netherlands, are not weaker than our laws. So what would I have expected to happen? What I hoped in trying to solve, because clearly, if you have, in my view, if you had, let's say, 1,000, 1,500 Israeli fans walking through Birmingham, staying in Birmingham, the risk increases of something happening significantly. And who the instigators of the problems are can't be, in my view, predicted easily. But the answer to that is you separate out the clashing fans, or the potential clashing fans, or the clashing community and fans. And the way you do that really simply is by reaching agreement that they're going to go on coaches. I mean, it's a pretty simple solution. It's used in derby matches regularly. When my club goes to Newcastle, let me tell you what we have to do. And there's no particular antagonism between my team's Leeds, my club's Leeds.
Yes, that's it.
And that's who I'm elected. I'm elected by the fans as, for some reason, to be their fan leader. But there's no particular antagonism between Newcastle and Leeds. But we're required, our coaches, to stop at Washington service station, and then we're taken by police convoy to Newcastle. My members get very aggravated about it because they don't see why they should. It means they have no contact with anyone in Newcastle, football fan or otherwise, and I suspect the rationale the policing know is, well, it may be cheaper to do it that way, it's more efficient to do it that way, it stops a problem. That happens in our country at derby matches regularly to stop those clashes. And those clashes are clashes inside communities. If you take, for example, let me give you an example, Preston versus Blackburn. Both football stadiums are inside communities, big communities, not dissimilar to Aston Villa. So if you have those two clubs which see themselves as major rivals playing, then you want to ensure that the visiting fans from one club don't try and antagonise the whole city of Blackburn or the whole city of Preston, when probably their aim is to antagonise the fans of said club, but they do with their songs, their chants, their behaviour, or the risk is they will to both. Well, that would be an obvious example of where a good police solution would keep those sets of fans away, and has done. And there are many examples like that. And in my view, for the lessons going forward, if you have a view that no Israeli club or fan therefore should be allowed in this country, that's a political view. And if one wants to, I don't mean you, if one does, but if one wants to protest that, there were people explicitly in Birmingham who have that view, who said before, during and after that that's what they wanted. So there's going to be a protest because some people think there should be no match taking place. So that has to be dealt with by the police and at a distance by the council. I think my problem with how it was done is some of the intelligence is not very good, some of it's not intelligence at all, and the tactics used could have been better. And I think going forward, my paper's got some recommendations to government. I mean, I think I suggested there should be a small task force done should there be such a fixture anywhere in the country again, so that mitigating the risk and negotiating. See, one surprising factor in negotiating with Maccabi Tel Aviv, the ultras weren't coming. So the Maccabi ultras, the so-called fanatics, weren't coming. Now I know that because after the fixture was, I presume they would be, and that was going to be the problem. And I feared that they'd do what they normally do, which is charter a flight and fly into Birmingham. And I didn't think that would be very helpful. So I spoke to Villa, I spoke to Maccabi Tel Aviv. I suggested to both clubs that the number of tickets be reduced, that they be coached in, that the fans had to go therefore to London, that they couldn't stay in Birmingham therefore. And Maccabi Tel Aviv told me that they had talked with their ultra groups and their ultra groups wouldn't be going. Now that's part of, you can't stop individuals, well you can, but it's very hard to stop individuals going. But for an ultra group to go, an ultra group will organise their own transport. That means a charter plane from Israel. So they'll organise their own transport over. They go as a group. Ultra culture is about collective watching of football. And there are thousands of examples across Europe. It's not particularly a thing in this country. But if I give an example from Saturday in this country, which you perhaps won't be aware of. So on Saturday, Airdrie Football Club played Hamilton in the Scottish Cup. Airdrie won 4-0. There were 345 people at the fixture. Between 70 and 80 of them, the ultras from the two groups, had a mass fight before the fixture. That's 1 in 4 of the spectators had a mass fight. Now that's ultra culture. It's not very helpful. They did it in a field, so probably away from, I'm guessing away from local communities, but that's not very helpful to anybody. So ultra culture needs to be understood in the football context, and these ultras travel as a group. Therefore, when Maccabi Tel Aviv told me they weren't coming, it meant they weren't coming, and it was other people coming. So the risk factor from that reduces dramatically, just as if there was an ultra group from Aston Villa who were antagonistic towards an ultra group in, say, Israel, that's a problem. In this case, there wasn't, because Aston Villa's so-called ultra group's pretty small, and certainly my experience of them has not caused a great deal of problems. Now, I suspect if it's Aston Villa, Birmingham City, it might be a different different context, but generally. So one looks and has to mitigate risk. I'm not sure. If just to read from the report, almost early on in the report, it says the following. This is the intelligence report. The most recent match Maccabi played in the UK was against West Ham in the Europa Conference League on 9th November 2023. This was part of the 23-24 European campaign. It marked Maccabi Tel Aviv's last competitive appearance on UK soil to date. That's in the intelligence report. That didn't happen. West Ham have never played Maccabi Tel Aviv. On that day, West Ham played Olympiacos of Greece and beat them 1-0. I think Tel Aviv were playing in the Ukraine, or not Ukraine, but somewhere playing a Ukrainian team. So in the intelligence report, it says there was a fixture that Maccabi were at in London. Now, if that was the case, what I would expect for a proper police intelligence report is someone would talk to the Metropolitan Police about what happened 2 years ago when these Maccabi hooligans, as they're called, came to London. Because obviously there'll have been problems. They couldn't do that because the fixture didn't take place. But they could have done it if they've asked the Irish police about a fixture in Dundalk. Ireland is not the most positive country towards Israel, I think it's fair to say, certainly its government. Maccabi Tel Aviv played in Dundalk, so there will be a report from the Irish police from not that long ago. The last fixture was actually against Chelsea. I went to it. There were 3,000 Maccabi fans. So there's a Met Police intelligence report and a report of the fixture. Before that, it was Stoke City. Stoke, I think it's reasonable to say, is not too dissimilar from Birmingham in terms of demography. So Maccabi played in Stoke, so there'll be an intelligence report from Stoke. Maccabi have played 103 away European fixtures, 103. That means there's 102 policing reports on Maccabi Tel Aviv. Tickets for next week's match at Stuttgart are on sale in Israel. Maccabi fans are going. The German police have had to make an intelligence report on exactly the same issue for the risks. And I'm looking, UEFA fines clubs. UEFA can give you that information. I had an online meeting with UEFA at the start of the process to ask what their procedure was. And UEFA fine clubs. So I can get, and I've looked at, all the fines that Maccabi Tel Aviv have had in the last 25 years. They've had one for what could be called violence. I think the term was crowd disturbance, but I'm calling it violence. It was a small place called Győr in Hungary in 2013. They had a number of incidents with what are called fireworks by UEFA, but in this country we'd call flares. So if I'm looking at what the risk factor with Maccabi fanatics, their ultra group is, it's flares. Because, like many ultra groups, they like to use flares. And if they bring flares, that's going to be a problem. And on the same night they played Tel Aviv, AZ Alkmaar played Crystal Palace. They did a march to the match with the police accompanying them. When they marched to Selhurst Park, they were lighting flares, and in fact they were fireworks. They were firing because it was near bonfire night, so you could buy fireworks in this country. I think we'd call them rockets. They were firing, so they weren't flares that you hold up. They were rockets that fired into the local communities. They marched, accompanied by the police, to Selhurst Park. That was the same night. If you look last week, Malmo played at Nottingham Forest. There was fighting by the Malmo fans with stewards and policing at Nottingham Forest. Bayern played at Arsenal. There was fighting between Bayern and the stewards at Arsenal. Celtic played at Rotterdam last week. The Rotterdam fans fired rockets, real fireworks, not flares, into the stadium live time when fans were in the stadium, and Celtic fans were assaulted inside the stadium in significant numbers. That's last week at football. And I mean, I could go on with other examples. You want to see the problem with flares? Ajax's match against Groningen last night was abandoned because the Ajax Ultras, who generally don't have that bad a reputation across Europe, the Ajax Ultras lit so many flares that for safety grounds the match had to be abandoned. And you can see that spectacularly online there. The same thing happened in the Hapoel Maccabi derby after this decision. Not a single flare when that match was cancelled had been fired by Maccabi Tel Aviv because they have a tiny percentage of the stadium for the derby match. They share a stadium. The flares were red, they were Hapoel flares, and it was Hapoel, I can't give a motivation. I think they were partly celebrating the fact that Maccabi had been banned in England, to be honest. So they had a massive pyrotechnic display at the stadium and the police cancelled the match. That's what happened. Now, Maccabi, rationally, in my view, should be seen as a risk on two grounds. And I'm not trying to cover up problems in football. The first is you're right. Their chants are racist. Therefore, if they wander through the streets of Birmingham with their chants, they may well get a reaction. That needs to be avoided. Secondly, with flares, and if you could make a recommendation as this committee that I think would be really useful, I think there needs to be more work done in terms of the potential for flares in football, not just from Israelis, because they're that's far worse than Israelis in terms of flares, because that's going to be a growing problem in football. And if you look at what happened in Ajax Amsterdam last night, you'll see that. I think that would be extremely helpful. I also think it'd be very helpful if the supporters advisory groups were to have a fan representative at their meetings. I think it alters the dynamics. So the Aston Villa fans should have had someone at the meeting, because they've got a perspective in this. Let's say there was a clash between the local community and Maccabi Tel Aviv, and I'm an Aston Villa fan going to the football. People go to football to get away from the world, including politics, to relax. I do, certainly, and everyone I know who goes does. So I'm an Aston Villa fan. I'm caught up in that. They should have had a say in this at the supporters advisory group. That would be a great recommendation, because that means then the fan voice gets to be heard. But some of the stuff in the report simply doesn't match the Amsterdam reports, and I think the evidence has been fitted to try and get a solution, which is a solution, because obviously you don't have the Israeli fans, there's no conflict. But there's an easier, better solution, which would have been simply to force a separation of the fans. And I think the Aston Villa fans, if asked, would have said, well, that'll be a better atmosphere, we'd rather have that. Because if you... a banning of fans needs to be properly intelligence-led. I'll give you an example.
I think we could do moving on to some questions.
Sorry.
No, that's all right.
I was just
it's been very,
giving a long answer.
very interesting, and it's really helping us in terms of what we're doing today. And we probably should reference the fact that last Thursday at the Villa Young Boys game didn't exactly go terribly well in terms of fan behaviour.
Predictably.
Yes. But Paul Kohler has got questions specifically on the West Midlands Police Intelligence, and I think perhaps some follow-ups on some of the things you've been saying.
Yeah, and before I go to that, just a very basic question on your report. What you submitted to the Home Office, the DCMS and Birmingham City Council?
Birmingham City Council only in the middle of the dialogue. The others got it in advance, yes.
When did they get it?
They certainly had it by, I think I sent it in January, they certainly had it by June, and the police had it in June.
Okay.
And so June, so well in advance of the fixture being...
Since the police as well?
Police as well, yes.
Okay. What was the reaction?
The police attempted to make... This isn't the West Midlands Police, it's the National Policing Unit. They attempted to get a meeting, which didn't happen, but that's not because they didn't want it to happen. It's because holidays overlapped. DCMS asked for a meeting. I had a meeting, and I alerted them to what I thought in this case, theoretical problems would be, and they said they would convene a meeting in order to discuss my report, but I heard no more.
And Home Office?
Nothing.
And Birmingham City Council, nothing
Birmingham
later
City
on?
Council, nothing.
Okay. Turning to the intelligence used by a quote cited by the West Midlands Police. Now, we know from history from the Iraq War, we know intelligence is sometimes sort of one-word oxymoron, but what's your view of the intelligence used by them or cited by them?
Well, it's inaccurate. It conflates different things. If I can give an example, the report says on match day, and I'm now jumping, but I'm quoting from it, inflammatory actions included tearing down Palestinian flags. That didn't happen on match day. And the day before match day, it was one flag. I actually did a full scan, spending several hours of Amsterdam, of Rotterdam and Utrecht each time, and each day I was there to see how many Palestinian flags there were. And I was surprised how few. And of course, they weren't, the few that I saw weren't hanging outside of buildings, they were in windows. So there is no evidence of more than one flag, and I think pulling down a flag is highly inflammatory and will get a bad reaction. So I'm not minimising the impact of pulling a flag down, but there was one flag pulled down on the Rockham. There weren't flags, and it didn't happen on the Thursday, the match day, it happened on the Wednesday. But this says on match day. That is inaccurate. There is no evidential base of that whatsoever. It says they were running street battles between the two groups throughout the day. That didn't happen. The battles, so-called, were after the fixture ended, after 11:30. Indeed, the Amsterdam police during the day were very successful in keeping different groups. The two groups they particularly identified, there was a what I'd call political protesters, pro-Palestinian protesters, anti-Israel protesters, and there were the Maccabi fans. They were very successful in keeping them separate. So that didn't happen on the day. The several attacks on taxi drivers. There were incidents again on the Roken. It's the same incident. It's about 45 minutes after the flag was pulled down. It's the night before. And again, that's a problem incident. If initially a taxi driver was attacked, I've seen the footage of it, I was showing it in Amsterdam, and then others got involved. It quickly dissipated, but nevertheless, that's rightly identified as a problem. But
Are you aware of the letter Mike O'Hara has sent the committee justifying the police's role in this?
No, I've not been sent that.
He speaks about 500 and 600 Maccabi fans deliberately targeting Muslim communities. What do you say to that?
I've got all the reports from Amsterdam, the Dutch reports. That's conflating two things. That what happened, and it's in their reports, in fact I can cite it from their reports. After the fixture, this is on the Thursday, the fans arrive at 11:30 p.m. in the town centre. Sorry, it's the night before, the Wednesday night. The fans are on the Roken, a flag is pulled down, the police identify that's a group of around 50 fans, who then dissipate. One police report suggests it ends up being around 70, and there's an altercation with taxi drivers. I've seen the footage. There certainly was an altercation. It involved a smaller number, but the maximum number there was 50 to 70. 400 Israeli fans were in a casino. The police got called because there was a group waiting for them outside the casino at about 2:30, waiting to ambush them. So the police came and very efficiently again stopped any major confrontation. So the 400 to 500 figure comes from adding the 400 to that smaller group. Now, the smaller group's still a problem for the police, obviously, and 50 people is a sizable group of in football terms, but it is not 500, and that's what worries me about the report, because they've been conflated, and that happens repeatedly in this report.
Sorry.
So, I mean, I just think what you're trying to say, quite clearly, is that the facts have slightly changed to fit the decision.
Correct.
That would be a summary of what's gone on here. Yeah.
And like the reference to 5,000 officers, is that conceivable? It says 5,000 officers were deployed over a number of days. Does that?
I spoke with the chief of police, Mr. Holler. I met the mayor. I met many other people there. It wasn't 5,000. The figure I've seen cited in their reports is 1,200.
Might that be 1,200 times 4, possibly? 1,200 a day, or was it 1,200
on any one day?
Yeah.
On match day, 1,200.
Yeah. So possibly, if you multiplied it by 4, you might get to 5,000 if you were.
You could, but that might give a different impression. Yes, you could. I see how your logic.
What other factors, apart from the Amsterdam intelligence, do you think influenced the West Midlands police?
I think the West Midlands police wanted a solution to a problem, because there was a problem. My report says there would be a problem. So there was a problem. And I don't know whether they attempted to get an earlier kick-off or not. I raised that with them. I don't know if that was attempted and that was ruled out. The solution of using coaches clearly wasn't considered. I mean, I went to the extent of even identifying a potential venue for coaches to assemble in London, which was discreet and very straightforward. A coach operation would have been very, very simple from from my football experience. I'm simply surprised at the fact that a football match at West Ham is put at the beginning of the report. To me, it kind of sums up the, there was a problem and the problem was solved, but it then had to be got through a committee.
To be absolutely clear, are you telling the committee that the safety of Maccabi fans could have been guaranteed?
I'm absolutely certain the safety of Maccabi fans could have been guaranteed if they were taken, and that was my advice to Maccabi Tel Aviv. I said, in my view, you should not have your fans staying in Birmingham. You should not fly directly into Birmingham. You should get your fans to stay in London, and we should bus them from London, and you should accept a low number of tickets. As they'd told me that they didn't anticipate their ultra fans coming, I thought that was very straightforward. But even with their ultra fans coming, fully uniformed in their shirts, etc., it's very straightforward. I give one example. If you have people assemble in London to get their ticket, then that's where they can be searched. So you have more time to search for flares. So you can also deal with the flares issue. And I thought that was very straightforward. And I think going forward, I'd be surprised if the Westminster Police don't agree that that would be quite a sensible scenario going forward to do, should there be such a fixture again in their jurisdiction.
Just so I can summarise your recommendations, you think the kick-off times need to be looked at so that you don't have the risk of fans staying overnight in a city that it might not be safe. You would use coaches and named tickets, presumably with passports, etc., required to be shown to demonstrate you are who you say you are. You would recommend more checking for flares on going in, which I mean, it does still astonish me that I see flares at football matches. They've been illegal at football matches for years and years and years, and yet somehow the checking that gets done doesn't seem to pick up flares. I don't know where fans secrete them, but they're always there. You think there should be a fan representative on safety advisory groups?
Of when there's football being discussed?
Yeah, and are there any other recommendations that you would make?
Yes, I would. I think it would be very helpful if government was to give a little bit of resource to the Changing the Chance project, which is precisely aimed at racist chants across Europe. Anne Frank House in Amsterdam has been in the lead in it. The German clubs have been very involved. I happen to have the German clubs coming over tomorrow, 20 of them, to meet their English counterparts on racism in football, anti-Semitism in football, which is of course part of racism, and misogyny and sexism in football. And we can learn a lot from Germany. I've suggested that there could perhaps be a partnership, and government might want to ratify between German football and English football, looking at these issues, because in German football they've been very effective at changing the chants. They've been very effective at dealing with, probably the right word, sexist and some horrific stuff. Very, very effective. They've been very effective at dealing with anti-Semitism, and I think that exchange would be very, very useful. So if your committee's powerful enough to prompt government, I think that would also be ongoing very helpful. Otherwise we'll be back here again. Statistically, an Israeli team will play a British team in a UEFA fixture. That will happen. The statistical likelihood is high that will happen. Well, a lot of the problems can be avoided by, and I'm much keener to see, my hope of your committee is that we solve the next problem rather than spend all our time on the last problem. That's what I attempted to do by going to Amsterdam and meeting everyone. I wasn't successful, I'm sorry about that, but I was attempting to see what to me was obviously going to be a problem at some stage that I think would have been relatively straightforward to solve. Now, if your objective is no Israeli club playing, which is a political objective, of course it doesn't do that. In fact, in many ways, it counters that because it makes it easier for an Israeli club to play. But that's a separate political issue, which you as politicians can have a view and vote how you want in Parliament on.
Do you think the Home Office is sufficiently engaged on this? I mean, I'm acutely aware as someone who's served in both the DCMS and the Home Office that this responsibility sort of falls between the two departments. I'm struck by you saying that there was no response from the Home Office to your report.
Well, I was told there would be a meeting between DCMS and the Home Office. If there was, I'm not aware of it. I think there should have been if there wasn't. And it's the second time that football policing has hit into Parliament. There's obviously the Casey review, which I think is on a different kind of scale of issue. I'm not sure the two are directly comparable. But people go to football to enjoy themselves, to relax, to avoid, I'll include myself in this, to avoid us, politicians and all of that. They go to football, to have a good time. And, what we attempt to do rightly is, if they do so, to make sure that they're not abusing players or other fans or anybody else in any way, including not least in racism. And generally, we've made big improvements in this country on that. Well, we should continue doing so. And I think some of the lessons learning from this will help to do so, including involving the Jewish community.
Thank you. We're going on to final questions around the impact on community relations. I want to bring Robbie Moore in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just sticking, Lord Mann, on impact on community relations. In your view, was the decision to exclude Maccabi Tel Aviv fans and the subsequent fallout that has happened increased the risk of anti-Semitism in the Jewish community of Birmingham?
The Jewish community of Birmingham feels that. Whether it actually does or doesn't, in a sense, perception is reality. And by the way, that would go for the Muslim community in Birmingham, feeling this is going to be a problem, because there were people telling them it was going to be a problem. Not many actually protested. We were told it'd be 300,000, and it was a very tiny number. I'm not surprised about that. But people's perception is their reality, their fears are their fears. And there are, if I could just quote Game Over Israel, which is an organisation trying to stop Israel playing in any sport. Their director, Ashish Prasha, said the following: Game Over Israel assisted West Midlands police before issuing a ban on Maccabi Tel Aviv fans from attending a UEFA European League game versus Aston Villa earlier this month by providing reports and evidence from lawyers on the Israeli team's fans' conduct. Now, I don't know if that's true. My suspicion would be, as happened in Amsterdam, there's people trying to take credit. What happened in Amsterdam was, you had the suggestion it was a pogrom, which is nonsense. There were 5 Israeli hospitalised, but not kept in overnight. There were 30 to 40 with minor injuries. Now, that's bad. That is not a pogrom. But there are also people saying, this is a great victory. We've beaten the Israelis. Well done, everyone. Also untrue. So you have people trying to use this. And, I don't know if this Game Over Israel did actually send stuff and have influence. I would hope not. But if they did, that has huge implications for community relations.
So whether it's perception or reality, in terms of the fallout, how would you expect the government to respond to that?
By ensuring that the overwhelming majority in all communities who would like football to go ahead without any hassle and people to go to it are heard. I didn't hear a single Aston Villa fan saying, we don't want the we welcome a competitive advantage of not having some away fans cheering on their team, which actually it gave them. Because that's not good sport, that's not how football works. And I think quite the opposite. What I was hearing from Aston Villa fans was, we don't think this is good. Why is this happening? And community relations are damaged if people can't go about their everyday life without hassle. Well, people should be able to go to football without hassle. If I'm Jewish or any other ethnicity, I should be able to go to a football match without any hassle in this country.
Thank you very much, Lord Mann, for your extensive and expansive responses to our questions. it's been very helpful for us in setting the scene for our next two panels, where we will go to law enforcement and PCC, and then we'll have the Minister. I'm very, very grateful for you coming today, but I will bring this part of the session to a close and give everyone a slight break between this and the next panel. Order.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Order, order. Now, can I welcome our witnesses to the second panel of our session today? Perhaps if you could introduce yourselves. Perhaps we start with Mr. Foster and then finish with you, Chief Constable.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Simon Foster and I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for the West Midlands.
Good afternoon, my name's Mike O'Hara. I'm an Assistant Chief Constable in the West Midlands. I've got the operations portfolio and I was the Gold Commander for the fixture.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Craig Guilford, Chief Constable.
Thank you. And I think you wanted to make an opening statement, Chief Constable.
Yes, and thank you, Chair, for giving me this opportunity, which is really important. In terms of declarations of interest, I'm not an Aston Villa fan. I am a football fan. I concur with much of what Mr. Mann said, and I do know him, and I have spoken to him during the duration of some of these matters, and he has also helped me in the past. So in terms of what I want to say, I know that there's been quite a lot of commentary in various quarters, and hopefully what I've constructed over the weekend will help address a lot of the questions that I've listened to carefully as well. So I do know that commentary has been made by certain members of Parliament and others in the media, and it's caused some frustration, and it's certainly caused some tension in local and national Jewish communities. As Chief Constable, I regret that that's happened, and I make it very clear that any suggestions of any invention or conspiracy on the part of West Midlands Police are completely wrong and misleading. We've acted with integrity all the way through this. So my officers have at times focused on their clear core policing responsibility. This is about safety. And from the get-go, the command team that was appointed are all fully accredited. They're very familiar with policing football events and public order events. Mike has the gold. There was a silver commander, very experienced, and a bronze commander too.
Just wait a moment for the bell to stop ringing. You're okay for a bit. We're okay for a few minutes.
Okay, I'll be as quick as. So public order and public safety events, we do our decision making, we use the national decision model, and at the core of that model, where we assess intelligence, information, we look at options and we make decisions, etc., is what we call the Code of Ethics. And that's for police leaders to make sure we act without fear or favour, we are apolitical, and we remember what our core responsibilities are. And we try all the time to do decisions which are proportionate and legal and necessary in these circumstances. So after the fixture was decided upon, despite all the sort of rumour that was going around about will any Israeli teams be banned from competitions, etc., we just started our planning process as usual. And to be fair, listening to what Lord Mann said, lots of what he said about the tactics of, do you do an intercept point in London, do you get a coach company to bring them up, do you take them to another place, etc., etc. All that was custom and practice and what we were planning for. So from the get-go, we were planning to facilitate this event with both sets of supporters at Villa Park. And regardless of any of the earlier conversations and sort of reporting around, certain elements would like the match completely banned, certainly from our perspective, that was never on the agenda. So we also instigated a community impact assessment, so we captured views of local population and also local interest groups, and those were both Jewish and Muslim. And as that situation progressed, we got to a gold meeting on the 17th of September, and we assessed that the level of the risk of disorder and disruption to be high. We'd learnt many lessons from the Legia-Walsall match, which we policed. We'd had 50 arrests. We'd done some ticket restrictions on that. We certainly had some tactics around the fans, and that resulted in significant disorder in the local area, despite a lot of police resources around it. Some officers were injured, I think some police animals were injured, and also street furniture was disrupted. So we wanted to avoid that from a command perspective. And the commander and I spoke to both commanders actually, and fully support their assessment and decision making that it was a high risk. Then on Wednesday the 1st of October, and this is very important, is that I sat down with the Chief Inspector, who is our planning expert, who had spoken to the 3 Dutch police commanders. And this really, panel, is where the difference occurs between what Lord Mann has said and the information that was provided to the Chief Inspector. And the information provided from the Dutch was very, very clear in terms of they reflected on the days before, during and after the match. as a result of clashes between the Maccabi ultras and the local Muslim community. The police in Amsterdam...
We'll stop in a moment.
This is more question 7.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
The police in Amsterdam were very stretched, particularly the day before, because they hadn't assessed the match as being high risk from their perspective. And they informed us very clearly, and I've spoken to the Chief Inspector myself on Wednesday of last week, that they said they deployed 2,000 riot police on the day of the match. And where the 5,000 comes from is exactly as you said, which is our professional assumption of our Silver Commander, which is over the 3 and 4 days of the actual event, you'd need about 5,000 police officers. So in terms of what we were told, the ultras were very well organised, militaristic in the way that they operated. They attacked members of the local community, including taxi drivers, tore down flags, people were thrown into the river, and definitely the singing, and I think the question from one of your colleagues earlier about the no schools in Gaza, as the children were all dead. They further stated that this group specifically targeted the local Muslim community deliberately. Members of the local and wider Muslim community subsequently reacted and deliberately then, on the day after mainly, attacked Maccabi fans on match day, both before the match and after the match, as Lord Mann has made reference to. That's what we were told. The Dutch commanders were unequivocal. They would never want to have Maccabi Tel Aviv playing in Amsterdam again in the future. That was what they said to our Chief Inspector.
Thank you.
So, having moved on from that position, lots of the information and intelligence was shared, and that document was actually leaked that had been referred to, that Lord Mann referred to. And that document was requested by the chair of the Safety Advisory Group. And as you know, they make the decision on the licence of the event, etc. And there was 3 Safety Advisory Group meetings. We participated in all those. There are multi-agency meeting. I think it has 2 local councillors on. They're all slightly different across the country. And they have our local partners on it as well. And we give our opinions, we give our assessment, we give the intelligence. And there's lots of options that are considered by the commanders and by the people that sit on that group. And in particular, options about playing a fixture behind closed doors, options about ticket restrictions, options about timing, etc. And one of the points I think that was quite rightly made by Lord Mann, because he asked me about it specifically, and I passed the information on to the Gold Commander, was about changing the time. And I passed that information on, and I thought that was a good suggestion. That, I believe, having spoke to the Gold Commander, was not something that was sort of supported by UEFA or by those that were involved in that particular element of decision making. I also concurred with what Lord Mann was saying in particular around how some of those tactics can take place. I'm very familiar with how Leeds worked as well, because I've commanded up there. But the Gold Commander took reasonable decisions and gave the information to the best of his ability to the committee, upon which the committee eventually made a decision.
I think we've got quite a lot of questions, and you're covering some of those points.
Trying.
But if you could be not much more of the opening statement,
okay.
That would be helpful.
Okay. So the main thing I wanted to say in conclusion was that the decision to restrict the away fans was based on a very careful assessment. It wasn't taken lightly, and it was taken on the basis of an assessment of the risk. And when we assess the risk, we look at information and we look at intelligence. And in particular, we were swayed by the commanders of the Dutch police and their direct reference to what happened from their perspective. Not my perspective, not Lord Mann's perspective, but their perspective to our Chief Inspector who was on that meeting. And I think the final thing I want to say is that the UK Football Policing Unit, I asked them to come and do an independent peer review of our decision making on the intelligence, the threat, the risk, the options that we took, and they've supported the decision making that was taken at the time. And I also just wanted to inform the committee that HMIC FRS, on behalf of the Home Office, are also undertaking some wider work which will hopefully pick up some of the recommendations that Lord Mann was making to you just before he concluded.
Thank you. We'll start our questions, and I'm sure we'll dig into some of the things you've been saying in your opening statement, but I want to turn to Paul Kohler.
Thank you for coming.
Pleasure.
Chief Constable Guildford, are you claiming that the intelligence you just cited is accurate? Are you still claiming that?
What I did in terms of the intelligence document, because it was a document provided to the SAG, which was a culmination of the information that had been given at the previous 2 SAGs, because that was verbal and it's captured just in the notes of the SAG, because it's minuted, the SAG is. We didn't produce an initial document, we produced that on the 3rd occasion at the request of the SAG chair.
Okay.
So if I'll answer your question directly. So the information in there, I've had reviewed ahead of coming today. And Lord Mann is absolutely correct. Within my narrative that I've compiled over the weekend, the one assertion in relation to the West Ham is completely wrong. That's as a result, I'm told, of some social media scraping that was done, and that is wrong. That was one element in a document which was 8 or 9 pages long. But the key tenets in the document.
So you did what? An AI search, and you got something about West Ham and just whacked it into the.
No, not at all. We do a very comprehensive assessment. Some of that we get from partners, other football clubs, the UK policing unit, our own intelligence collection, and we also search through social media to see what's trending, what are the posts, who's following the posts, etc., etc. So it was as a result of that. But I say very candidly, that element was wrong, but that element had no material impact on that document whatsoever.
Did it not go to your whole attitude that you were just looking for something and whacking it down? Why didn't you talk to the Met about this fictitious West Ham match?
The reason that we didn't talk to the Met is because, well, I believe that particular piece of information which was wrong, which we placed on that document, was irrelevant. And in terms of your first question to me, we've taken a careful approach. We haven't taken a cavalier approach, and we haven't tried to make anything fit. We've given the information we were asked to provide.
Back to my question, are you asserting the intelligence you talked about from the Amsterdam match, are you asserting all of that is still true? Or are you asserting the intelligence was flawed?
I have no reason to doubt the integrity of my chief inspector or my other commanders who were involved in this process, and in particular the chief inspector that spoke to the 3 Dutch commanders. So why
are the Dutch commanders saying something different then? Why are the Dutch police saying something different? Why is the mayor of Amsterdam saying something different? Why is Lord Mann saying something different? Are they all lying to us?
I think that's a very strong statement that you've just made, and I would say that I've said at my beginning around my respect for Lord Mann, but at the same time I'm telling you very clearly what my chief inspector said as a result of that meeting, and I know that information, when it was passed through to the Gold Command and the Silver Commander, changed the assessment.
Are you accepting the intelligence as a correct view of the facts, or are you saying, or are you just saying that was the intelligence you received? Which of those two things are you saying?
I am saying, in effect, both, because I believe what my chief inspector said from the Dutch commanders and that he shared with his other commanders, but I'm also saying that I listened carefully to what Lord Mann articulated, and he's told me previously that there have been various reports from different elements of the media as to what did happen in Amsterdam.
Are there minutes of this conversation the Chief Inspector had with the police, the 3 commanders from Amsterdam?
Yeah, he produced a subsequent email that he sent into the chain of command, yes.
Can we have sight of that?
Yeah, we will certainly happily provide that to you.
Certain suggestions. There were 500 to 600 fans involved in targeting disorder, 200 linked to the IDF, fans thrown in the river, serious assaults on the Muslim taxi drivers, all contradicted by the Dutch police. Who am I to believe? That you saying that happened or them saying it didn't happen?
That's why I sat down last week, following having received a a letter from the policing minister with the chief inspector and attempted very much to talk to the horse's mouth. I have no concern about that individual's integrity in what he told me and what he documented that was from the Dutch police.
To answer to my previous question, you said you believe both what your chief, what was his status?
Chief inspector.
Your chief inspector told you, and you believe that it actually happened, and yet the Dutch police are saying it didn't happen. So why do you still think it happened?
I still think that because I listened very carefully to what my chief inspector said last week. But of course, in this discourse and having prepared for today, I'm open to listening to lots of different views. And as the intelligence and the information developed, that's exactly what the police did and discussed that at the Safety Advisory Group.
Do you accept that it didn't happen? Or you just don't know whether it happened or not, these things?
No, just to be very clear, I believe what my chief inspector told me.
But he was listening to what he was being told. I'm asking you what happened. I'm not asking what he was told.
Well,
what else have you done beyond just talk to your chief inspector?
Well, the other thing that I've done in addition to talking to my chief inspector is obviously speaking to the silver and the gold commander about their assessment of the information and the intelligence. That's what I've done in addition. But in terms of answering the question of what did or didn't happen in very forensic detail on the ground on the day, I wasn't there, you weren't there. I'm taking what I've been told very seriously from a professional who's got good credibility, who's been involved with this type of policing activity for years. I've got no doubt to question his integrity.
Have you not pondered why the Dutch police are now contradicting all of it?
Well, of course, we've probably all done lots of pondering.
And what's your view on that?
My view on that is that I suspect there was lots of, let's say, pressure locally on the Dutch police as a result of this match. My very careful conclusion from looking at everything and listening to what people have said, and indeed listening this afternoon to what Lord Mann said, is that I think initially the Dutch probably underestimated the level of threat and risk. And the day before the match, they were extremely stretched. The day of the match, they deployed an absolute abundance of riot-trained police, and I think the whole incident left them in a position whereby they hadn't anticipated the level of disorder, and also in terms of one side's approach.
It didn't happen. Are you saying they're now in denial? So that you're saying they didn't anticipate this, it happened, and now they're in denial. Is that what you're telling us?
I'm not saying that they're in denial, but you, with respect, you would have to ask them their version of events, wouldn't you, not me? I'm telling you directly what the person on the online room has told me, because I went to check the detail personally.
So, you must have known that this would be a deeply controversial decision if the SAG decided to ban away fans in light of. Did it not occur that there should be due diligence done on the intelligence that had been provided?
Absolutely, and we did do our due diligence on the information and the intelligence that we were provided with. We'd liaised with the UK football unit. We'd got a tried and tested bronze, silver and gold command structure, and we were actively seeking and developing all the intelligence that we could all the way through, from community intelligence to online intelligence and information that we receive as an organisation. So absolutely, you're absolutely correct in what you've said there.
You'd had Lord Mann's report. Lord Mann had been to Amsterdam to look at what had happened for himself after the Ajax match.
Yeah, we didn't have his report. I think he said it didn't involve West Midlands. It was sent into the Home Office, and I assume into the UK FBU.
You could have had access to it, presumably.
We could have had access to it, but he told me verbally that there were different versions of events as to what happened. And he felt that some of the articulation in the press was different than what he'd found. And he said to you this afternoon what he found.
And what was the other intelligence? What other intelligence did you have about Maccabi Tel Aviv fans? I mean, did you go to Staffordshire Police and ask what happened in Stoke, or the Met and ask what happened at Chelsea?
No, what we do is, when we're assessing all those elements of information, we go to the UK FBU, and we also liaise with the clubs. So we've spoken to Aston Villa, I believe we spoke to Maccabi as well during the process. And also, I think, on the weekend after the decision had been made by the SAG, there was also some reporting about Maccabi's derby match in Tel Aviv being abandoned due to, I think it said, violent riots was the Israeli police description of it.
What we heard from Lord Mann, that was the other fans, it wasn't the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, it was because they share the stadium, so it was the Red fans rather than...
Yes, that's what Lord Mann said. I think from our perspective, that was another element of intelligence that we put into our model itself.
Joe White wants to come in, and then Robbie Moore.
Yeah, I found it quite presumptuous that you presumed that the Dutch police were under pressure. Was there any exploration of that assumption that they're under pressure to present a very different picture to your Chief Inspector than to what was the reports that we have had?
Absolutely, and that's why I went to speak to him. But do you want to elaborate on that?
I can hopefully help a little bit. So our Chief Inspector Head of Policing football unit within the West Midlands Police met with the 3 Dutch commanders, the gold, silver and bronze. So within football or public order policing, forgive me, you have a gold strategic, tactical, silver and a bronze operational commander. He met with those 3 commanders in an informal, unrecorded meeting in an effort to get candour and a view in relation to their experience of policing this particular football match. They specifically referenced the political and press pressure and interest, and provided a verbal briefing to our commander, who then documented that in an email and sent it into the command chain. So that was the first part. Since then, clearly we've had the Sunday Times article, etc., whereby Sebastian Mayer has naysayed some of the elements within the WMP report. I've since spoken to Peter Holler, the Gold Commander, and Sebastian Mayer from the Dutch Police, and they are very clear they're under a lot of pressure, in their words, from City Hall. So, and their position as reported to the Sunday Times was, we don't recognise this, we don't recognise that, we don't recognise this. Subsequently, then, I'm led to believe they've now released a further statement with more detail, and it is very clear they seem rather apologetic to us as a force and are trying their best to provide something that is meaningful and helpful and accurate. But I think it's probably fair to say, as a West Midlands Police Commander in the West Mids who was not involved in Ajax, there is definitely some interpretation about what happened in Amsterdam.
Can I ask, what intelligence did you seek from football policing security bodies in Israel?
So all of our liaison with Israel was through the UK FPU, and we had no response.
And did you seek intelligence from Europol?
Again, that's all through UK FPU. They effectively facilitate our communication, contact and gathering of information from other forces.
So you did seek intelligence from them?
I personally didn't say speak to Europol, but we do liaise with UK FPU, who are very clear around the key stakeholders that we should be liaising with.
So you did seek intelligence from UK PFU?
Yes.
But received no response?
UK FPU, UK Football Policing Unit.
And did you seek intelligence from UEFA?
Personally, I didn't, but UEFA, I think, were involved.
Did West Midlands Police seek intelligence from UEFA?
I can't confirm, but I believe so, yes.
So you believe so?
Correct.
And if it is certain that you did, or West Midlands Police, can you share that correspondence with this committee?
Sure.
You said in your opening statement that the suggestion of changing the kick-off time was mooted, but UEFA didn't. Did you even know at that point that there was a risk that the away fans wouldn't be able to attend if it was a 8 p.m. kick-off?
No, it's a little bit more along the lines of what Lord Mann said, actually, Chair. There was a slight issue with regards to a particular religious observance in relation to transport, and it would make the transport arrangements easier for the Israeli fans if that kick-off time was brought further forward. So I passed that on to the commander at the time.
This was the information given to UEFA? Do you know what information did UEFA have when they said no, we're going to stick with 8 p.m?
I don't know the answer to that question, Chair, but I can try and find that out for you.
I appreciate that, thank you. We're going on to a bit more about the intelligence about the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans with Paul Kohler again.
With regard to Stoke, with regard to Chelsea, you didn't seek direct evidence, intelligence about that. You didn't make any inquiries into that. You were able to cite fictitious matches off the internet, but you didn't actually go and look for actual information from those who had Maccabi fans previously. Is that right?
Excellent. There you go.
I think when you say a fictitious match off the internet, I've been really straightforward in saying that as part of my preparation, that was wrong. But that doesn't mean that document was wrong. And in terms of speaking to those other teams, I believe that was from some years ago rather than in the recent past when those other teams have played Maccabi. But I will stand corrected on that.
Yeah, so in relation to the evidence or the information within the document, I think I would just want to clarify the document, if I may, just on that point. So you've effectively had 2 SAGs which are verbal and oral updates, and then as a direct result of the scrutiny, the increased political increased political pressure, the increased pressure or publicity, the chair of the SAG specifically asked for something in writing. So the Silver Commander drafted a document which contains information, intelligence, and the views of the Silver Commander. So it's not evidence, it's a combination of information and intelligence. You are right to call out that one of the elements in it is incorrect, and that's a...
Does it not point to your due diligence for you to include a fictitious match off the internet? Does that not point to something rotten in the state of the way you were doing it? If that could creep through.
I don't think it does, no. I think if you review any policing operation and any policing document, there is a range of diligence, there's a range of checks and balances that take place, but there is always going to be improvements that can be made in any piece of work of this scale.
Turning to the risk of anti-Semitic violence, which you described as a relevant concern, can you explain why it was a relevant concern and wasn't a primary concern?
Well, a commander would weigh up all those things, both a silver and a gold commander, as part of the process of making the decision. And again, with our code of ethics at the centre of that, and part of that is to consider the interests of all parties and to identify particular groups. And it was a relevant concern, and it's been documented, and as we've reviewed all the documentations, from the outset it was a relevant concern. And that's why you commence early doors community impact assessment. And when we were doing that process, that's very clearly, that was a theme that was coming through. It was a theme that was picked up on by the commanders, and it was a theme that was coming bottom up from the community too.
Was there a primary concern?
I think it depends on when you ask the question. So forgive me. So I took command on the 17th of October. When I've reviewed everything and spoken to all of the relevant commanders, the threat assessment consistently changes. So at one point when you start, and our working assumption is that all fans will be attending, then hate crime and anti-Semitism was absolutely a concern. By the time it becomes apparent that Maccabi are not going to accept any away tickets, then that concern reduces, albeit it doesn't totally abate, because there were some pro-Israeli protests which we also needed to account for and support.
You talked about political pressure earlier, or political. Where was the political pressure that you received?
Forgive me, I probably misspoke. I was probably referring to the social media posts that took place on the 16th of October.
There was no political pressure, despite what you said earlier?
No political pressure locally, no.
Okay. And you would concur with that?
Absolutely, yeah.
At no point was politicians didn't talk to you about any of these things?
Loads of people talked to us, and we talked to loads of people. We also talked to the local MP. But lots of people wanted the match to go ahead, and lots of people wanted no Israeli team playing in Birmingham. But that was something that was raised as an issue early doors. But as you can see, and as I've tried to explain, our starting point was this match is being played, both teams are coming, both sets of fans are coming, and we'll do our best to facilitate it. But our mission is to keep people safe and to try and police it in the safest possible manner and to deliver the best service we can to all those people that are coming, to the clubs who are legitimately there to conduct their business, but also to the local residents who live in that very tight bit of geography.
And you stand by the position that you could not guarantee the safety of all the fans, all the people without Maccabi not.
Yes, I heard your question to Lord Man actually, and it's not a question of you. It's very difficult to guarantee 100% everybody's safety. We have to assess the risks, often on incomplete information, and what we always try and do is minimise those risks wherever possible. Minimise the risks to everybody that we've identified as a concern. And that's what we did. It's not about eliminating 100% of risk, because I just don't think that's always possible.
Of course not. So why was it necessary to ban the fans?
The necessity around the tactic that was used after the options had been gone through around closed doors, around restricting the numbers, etc. The necessity was made following an assessment by the police, who gave that information to the Safety Advisory Group, and the Safety Advisory Group made that decision.
How often has this happened? How often have the police, in effect, banned fans from a visiting team?
In Europe it happens.
Oh, in the UK?
Oh, in the UK it rarely happens. It's usually, and as Lord Man correctly identified, exactly what we were doing at the start, which is, can we consider some different tactics to mitigate the risk?
So why was this so exceptional?
Because we believed, or the commanders believed, that the level of risk was so very high.
Was that belief a belief you still think was the right belief to have?
Yeah, I mean, when I've looked at it, and obviously I've been a commander myself for a number of years as well, you know, was it a reasonable decision to take in the line of weighing up all those options? And I think it was a reasonable decision that the commanders took, and it was a decision made without sort of rushing into things. It was made in the best interests and the safety of everybody concerned. I don't think they made it for any other reason. It was made for a good reason, without fear or favour. And yes, we can look and we can learn lessons. Indeed, we'll be having a review after the event, and we're fully participating in the HMIC exercise after. And of course, we would have some recommendations potentially to feed in. But specifically to answer your question, I believe they made it by applying their professional judgment and acting properly in all of the circumstances.
So your view is Maccabi fans should always be banned from a UK game, because these issues you say are so critical and so different will always be there. Is that what you're telling us?
Well, as Lord Man said, that they are so different and they are so critical. I'm not telling you that. That's what you've just suggested to me. I always try to operate on the basis of you take each game on its own merits. I always, the last thing you want to do when you're weighing up options is to consider something like that. You think about all the other options to mitigate the risk beforehand, all those other measures. So I wouldn't want to say in any way, shape or form that it should be a blanket. Each fixture needs looking at on its own merits, and that's why we have a bronze, silver, gold structure to do just that.
When did you find out that the ultras were not going to attend? I mean, that surely brings the risk level down quite significantly.
I don't think we ever had that information intelligence. So the decision was made, or the recommendation was made, forgive me, by the SAG on the 16th of October. Clearly, the Chief had some communication with the Home Office around exploring other options, which we were already doing anyway. The proposal from Lord Mann was pretty much what our plan looked like in relation to using coaches, protecting the away fans, taking them to a different venue, and then trying to facilitate their safe entrance, etc. So we were reviewing that as a plan, and then Maccabi withdrew, in effect, their away ticket allocation.
Just so I can get this right, you make a recommendation into the SAG, and the SAG takes the decision. How different was your recommendation for last week's Young Boys game compared to the recommendation on this game?
I wasn't privy to the Young Boys SAG decision, but I imagine it was different. And the main difference was the information that we had from the Dutch commanders, that the concern was that the Maccabi fans, Maccabi ultras, forgive me, because again, there is something that say that the broader, Israeli fans, we've got a lot of Jewish fans who support the Villa. The risk fans particularly caused sufficient concern, and the Dutch police feedback to us directly to our head of football unit was that they attack community members, not rival fans. And that's quite unusual for ultras, is that they tend to target opposition fans as opposed to community members, and that's what causes such concern.
I'm puzzled here because, as I say, this is a very politically sensitive decision that was taken. At the point the decision was taken, the ultras, had the decision been taken at that point that the ultras wouldn't be coming? The due diligence doesn't appear to have been very thorough in that there was a fictitious match in the advice, and doesn't appear that that was even looked at. I mean, surely with something so politically sensitive, this should have been reviewed and double checked and triple checked because you wouldn't be sitting in front of us today if it had been.
I agree with what you've just said there about being reviewed, and as I've said about the level of candour, that the West Ham thing didn't happen, but the West Ham thing was completely irrelevant to the assessment of the risk. It was alleged that took place at a certain time, the last time that they played in the UK. There was nothing else said about any violence attached to that, any problems attached to that, nothing. But going back to your first question about the ultras, you asked when were we told that they weren't coming. We weren't advised that the ultras weren't coming. We didn't have intelligence that said to us the ultras weren't coming through that process. We didn't have that actual specific intelligence. So when I've listened to Lord Mann earlier, that was the first time I've heard someone say that, the ultras aren't coming, because the club told me they're not coming. That wasn't information.
Didn't you speak to the clubs? I mean,
of course, we were speaking.
If Maccabi Tel Aviv were telling Lord Mann that, why did they not say it to you?
Well, I don't know why that was not said to us. But again, what I take you back to is this isn't just taking what one person says alone. It's to try and assess the risks in the round and to take the information in the round. And in terms of the risks that we found, the risks very much were in relation to the safety of everyone, and in particular the risk that the ultras posed. Now, what you've just asked me about, did we not know? I've said very clearly, to my knowledge, we weren't told that the ultras weren't coming. But again, we have to take some of that on face value, and we have to challenge some of that, don't we? Because these are a group of people who are intent on some very extreme violence, and they don't normally share their sort of plans of, let's say, operations with everybody openly and candidly.
Joe White.
Yeah. I'm surprised you weren't having discussions with Maccabi Tel Aviv immediately before you made that decision, because that understanding that the ultras weren't coming would have been absolutely critical to any decision making.
We had spoke to them before, to be fair.
Okay, but my other question is, you identify that you felt there were threats to the Israelis from the local community. What assessment or links did you make, or communications did you have with local community groups and the risks that were felt from those?
So, shall I start? So basically, through the community impact assessment, you get all that information that comes through. So one of the local neighbourhood chief inspectors from Birmingham was leading on that for us. So we have a local geographic policing method, community policing, that gets fed up. We also have, within the West Midlands Police, we have a couple of advisors, one of which is a Jewish inspector and one of which is a Muslim sergeant, who were also advising us on what was being picked up from a cultural perspective, but also on a very specific community perspective. So that information was collated. We regularly meet with those groups of people. We meet with residents locally. The first goal commander met the local MP as well for the area, for the Aston area. And we met with groups who were interested. We always do that to try and gain the intelligence. That's very much a local policing responsibility. All that information then is fed into the command structure, the bronze, silver and gold. And that's what we do for all fixtures. So this was no different in that respect. And in terms of the information that we found, clearly there was some very, let's say, opposing views all the way through this event. And also there was intelligence around people's intention to protest both local individuals, but also individuals from further afield. So all that was fed in to the command team.
And whilst it is commonplace for people to protest, and particularly in today's times, isn't that just merely another policing matter rather than a decision to stop fans attending a game?
I think it is, but it's so intrinsically linked to the event and the geography of the event. So the intended protest locations and some of the intelligence that we got was very specific around Villa Park. And Villa Park, although, as Lord Mann said, was, it's relatively easy to get to at the front of it, its geography is very tight around those streets there. And I think at the time, I might need correcting, was that even the coach park was sort of having some works done at it as well. So the geography was very tight. And clearly, that all got fed into the system, which informed decision making. Because it wasn't just a case of, this is a regular policing of a football match. This had a lot more aspect to it as a result of the people who were originally going to be attending the football match, and also some of the local people who live very close to that stadium.
If I could just follow on, just around firstly the community engagement. So our Chief Inspector from Birmingham, so we identify key bronze commanders who have key roles. So there were 12 operational bronzes deployed for the fixture. 6 of them relate to public order, and the remaining 6 have different roles. One of them was a community bronze. So this particular community bronze developed a community engagement strategy, which is documented, and commissioned a community impact assessment. That included input and feedback from a range of community reps, the CST, representatives from different synagogues, mosques, etc. So we had quite a good sense of the fear and trepidation, I think, from our communities. The second point you raised, just around protest, just being another police issue, it's quite interesting hearing Lord Mann talk about how easy it is just to police and manage a number of people into and out of Villa. It is in the heart of a very deprived residential area, and football policing and protest policing in and of themselves, it's never straightforward, first and foremost, but secondly, when you pull them together, it adds a different dynamic. So on taking command on the 17th of October, I had 4 strategic threats: protest, the football match, the team, and disorder. Those are my 4 key things that I was trying to manage, and we did that with over 1,000 officers. So it wasn't straightforward, and that was without Maccabi Tel Aviv fans present.
So, you said you'd had no political pressure locally, but you spoke to the local MP. Is that normal? Would you normally speak to the local MP about matches?
Yeah, we speak to the MPs all the time, the local police commanders do, and if we've got a particular issue in a locality, we'd always try and speak to the local MP. customer practice, nothing out of the ordinary for that at all.
You had a conversation about the young boys going with them, did you, as well? You had the conversation about the young boys match with the MP as well?
I don't know if they'd approached us to have a conversation about that at all.
So the MP approached you to have the conversation?
I think it was the club, actually.
The club approached the MP?
The football club, so Aston Villa, I think, had been approached by the MP.
Right.
Aston Villa then asked, I think it was Birmingham City Council for the SAG responsibility side of things, and ourselves to meet with the MP. And it was, from our perspective, of course we're going to meet.
And I just come back to, I'm still totally puzzled by this lack of due diligence. You talked about sources of information. It appears to me that you took the chief inspector, who I don't doubt their integrity, I'm not in any way casting aspersions about them, but that was the piece of intelligence that led you to recommend that the away fans should not be allowed to attend. So one piece of intelligence from one chief inspector based on a conversation I'm presuming he had with 3 commanders from Amsterdam. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's what changed the assessment. That certainly influenced, I don't want to speak for Mike, but that certainly influenced the way that the assessment was heading. Because as I said to you at the beginning, the assumption, all the planning assumptions were this was going to occur with both teams and both sets of fans.
Did you have any conversation with the Police and Crime Commissioner? And perhaps the Police and Crime Commissioner, who's been exempted from questioning so far, might want to contribute.
Can I just very quickly just come back on the last question, if you don't mind, Chair? Forgive me. So, can I just say, as the Gold Commander, I genuinely believe that the Silver Commander tried to do the right thing. Do I think by not running that through the Intel Bronze and getting that fact check before submission, I think you're absolutely right. It should have gone through the Intel Bronze before being submitted to the SAG. I agree with that around the due diligence. But just around the content, the assertion that it's just the Dutch intelligence is not accurate. So we had feedback from the community impact assessment, we had online reporting, we had Dutch feedback, we had police intelligence, sensitive and otherwise. So there are a range of factors that built the risk threat picture that allowed us to try and work through the options and try and almost work to the least risky option.
The community impact assessment, was that submitted to the SAG?
No, but it informed the threat assessment that the Silver Commander put within the document.
Why was it not submitted to the SAG?
It wasn't specifically asked for. There's a lot of stuff that's created in every operation, and to be fair, within the SAG there is a community cohesion representative that talks on behalf of Birmingham City Council and the community feedback.
Could we see the community impact assessment? Can we have sight of it?
So that was started way before.
Understood. And who was the community representative on the SAG? And we've got more questions on the SAG, but just so we can be clear on that.
I don't know the person's name. They're employed by Birmingham City Council, and you've got the community cohesion representative, and then there are 2 councillors as well.
And the community impact assessment, was there members of the communities that were saying they didn't want the Maccabi fans there, and did that include any Jewish representatives?
Yes.
So there were Jewish community representatives who said they didn't want the Maccabi fans there.
There was feedback documented within the community impact assessment that was clear that there were a range of faiths, backgrounds and ethnicities that were very concerned about this fixture.
A range of, but was there Jewish?
Yes. Documented within the CIA from the beginning of September.
We'll move on to Safety Advisory Group decision-making process with Margaret Mullane.
Thank you. Given that the yourselves stated in a letter to us that you would have been able to police the fixture within your existing resource envelope, why did you not recommend that option to the SAG?
So the challenge with policing is you can't guarantee everyone's safety. So you get your information intelligence, you can develop a threat assessment and a working strategy, and you then consider your range of options. So a range of options were considered, and it was felt that the best way of maximising the safety of officers and staff and protecting the public was to restrict the away fans.
Okay, so have you ever recommended excluding away fans before, bearing in mind that you said you're confident of your ability to police the fixture?
No, we haven't. However, in 2023, the game against Legia Warsaw, we restricted the ticket allocation for that group, and that turned into one of our most challenging disorders that we've ever dealt with.
And could I ask, did the SAG put pressure on you to exclude it? Would you say that's a fair question?
I wasn't present in any of the SAGs. However, from reviewing the minutes and from knowing the chair of the SAG, who's quite a strong individual, I would suggest he didn't feel any pressure, or he didn't give us any pressure, and likewise the other way.
So the chair just alluded to, and you answered the question about who was there, councillors, MPs, who you speak to, that kind of thing as well. So how would you know that there wasn't pressure?
Well, based on conversation with the people who attended,
yes, and
the minutes of the meeting.
Right, okay, thank you. And if I could ask Simon Foster a question. As an outsider to the SAG, do you have confidence after listening to this today that SAGs are free of political influence?
As Police and Crime Commissioner, I have no involvement with SAGs, as you've quite rightly alluded to. I'm not a member of the SAG, I don't attend the SAG, I'm not a consultee of the SAG. And indeed, before this most recent set of events, I think I'd only ever had a safety advisory group cross my radar once before during the entirety of my term, and that was in relation to a community event. So I have very little interaction with SAGs, so I am a little reluctant to express a view as to how effective and efficient they are based on that limited experience. However, I think they, in broad terms, perform a useful function. As far as I'm aware, they've been around since the recommendations following Hillsborough. That's quite a long period of time. I'm not aware, and perhaps members of the committee will know otherwise, but I'm not aware of there having been expressions of a lack of trust and confidence in the way that SAGs operate on other occasions or in other parts of the country. You may know better. I'm certainly not aware of that myself. So I'd be reluctant to draw that sort of a conclusion based on my limited personal experience and my lack of knowledge as to how they operate in other circumstances across the country.
Thank you. Paul Kohler.
I'm still struggling with the decision to ban the fans. You said it was the best way to minimise the risk, but that would always be the case. It would always be the case to minimise the risk, would it not, with ultras?
No. So I think, again, the challenge here is that operational plans consider a range of tactics and issues. We talk about the young boys. The issue of the young boys was their behaviour inside the ground. The challenge for us here was the concern communicated via the Dutch into our head of football unit that the Maccabi risk fans, not the broader fans I hasten to add, were very organised and targeted community members, and that was our greatest fear, combined with then the disproportionately escalatory effect they have in the community. So as you know, we have a very deprived but also a very diverse community in the West Midlands, and the sense was with some risk fans who are potentially looking for trouble and then a community who are unhappy about that situation, there was a real risk of escalation. And having spoken to the chief on the way down here, there is something that said, had we allowed the fans and it had gone wrong, I feel like I would be sitting here again anyway. So my genuine view is, albeit the decision was made before I took command, from my review, I felt like this was a good decision, and this was reviewed by UK FPU and subject matter experts nationally who said that is a sound decision.
Just to be clear, you agree with the Chief Constable that both the intelligence was as it has been said to us, and that was an accurate view of what happened? Do you agree with both of those aspects?
I think my position is that the situation in Amsterdam is definitely open to interpretation, but broadly, the Maccabi Tel Aviv risk fans clashed with local communities and created huge challenges around safety and policing and keeping the calm. So my view is, broadly, when you look at that risk, plus what was being fed online, we had online reporting about Maccabi Tel Aviv fans posting the Amsterdam footage on the 3rd of October. So we could see an escalation and rising tensions, and we were trying to mitigate that threat. So the assertion almost that we've made this decision with any other purpose other than public safety is incorrect.
Peter Prinsley.
No, ask a little... Hello, yeah, I'm Peter Princely. I'm the MP for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket. Can I ask, where there's no football club, by the way, can I ask a little bit about the SAG? What does the SAG consist of? Who are the members of the SAG? And how are they appointed?
So this is not my area of expertise, forgive me. So others tend to attend the safety advisory group, but my understanding is it is usually hosted by a local authority, and the chair of the SAG makes a recommendation to the local authority around safety certificates and licences. But it usually contains what we would refer to as blue light partners, police, ambulance, fire. In this particular scenario, they were all present, as well as Transport for West Midlands, Community Cohesion, councillors, etc.
So there are elected councillors sitting on the SAG from Birmingham City Council.
In Birmingham SAG, yes, there are.
The district. And there was also input from the local MP.
Not in the SAG, no.
No, okay. So the idea that there could have been no political input into the decision that was made is a little bit difficult for us to grasp. If there were political figures, elected officials, right at the heart of the decision making, who were no doubt being influenced by the advice which was coming from the police service, albeit based itself on intelligence which now seems to be, to say the least, a little bit questionable. So we now have a situation in which we have questionable intelligence which is informing a SAG which within its makeup has elected political figures. And we also hear stories of the input of the local MP. So can we be completely confident that there was no political interference in the decision of the SAG that was the result of a prejudiced assessment of the advice and information?
I think that's a question for Birmingham City Council and the SAG chair. So each SAG, my understanding, forgive me, again, this is not my area of expertise, operates within some key principles, but their makeup and how they operate is slightly different depending on the area. So I think the point that there are elected members, councillors on the SAG in Birmingham is absolutely a point that I think Birmingham should consider. But I couldn't possibly comment in relation to whether the chair felt like he was influenced politically or not.
You do understand that this was a politically charged decision, which then led to questions in the House of Commons and input from the Prime Minister. So it must have been obvious to the members of the SAG that this would have a political consequence.
I think it was probably obvious that there were political consequences, but my assurance to yourselves as a panel is that we were not influenced in any way, shape or form by anybody politically. You know, we did our service to the best of our ability, and the officers acted in line with their training and professionalism. But the answer to your question can really only come from the chair of the SAG.
Who are the people who made the decision for the match, for the fans not to attend? That's correct. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Joe White.
Yeah, I've got two questions. First of all, most SAGs in other areas don't have political representatives. Do you think that's an appropriate way to go forward? And secondly, with the young boys, they do have a history of violence outside the football ground, such as in September and February. So surely different policing responses should be considered very differently towards them as well.
Yeah, so I mean, that question just underlines what I was saying before about you treat each game on its own merits. Mm-hmm. But your first question in relation to SAGs, yes, I am aware that they're slightly different in their composition across the country. I think it very much, should be underlined by clear terms of reference, etc. But any decision as to who sits on that particular body, I think is one which would probably merit some wider debate, because even though there may be no interference whatsoever, I think the concept of any appearance of such is one potentially for yourselves as a committee to take consideration of in the future going forward. So that would be my direct answer on that. It wouldn't be right for a police chief to be saying how should a SAG be complemented by politicians or should it not. That's really for lawmakers to decide, in my view. But from our perspective, whatever the mechanism is, without fear or favour, we'll produce our information, intelligence, opinions. We are a participant in that process, and our partners around that table are free and open to express their views too, and they know the local area as well.
Mr Foster, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As Police and Crime Commissioner, as you'll probably appreciate, I take a declaration of office when I become Police and Crime Commissioner, and there is a very clear requirement within that declaration of office that I will not interfere with operational day-to-day policing. And indeed, the policing protocol is very clear about the separation of operational day-to-day policing and my role as Police and Crime Commissioner around accountability, governance, oversight and scrutiny. And I take those requirements extremely seriously indeed. And I would certainly not ever seek to provide any level of political interference around a decision such as this, or indeed any other decision. Now, as far as the position regarding the SAGs are concerned and the presence of elected representatives on SAGs, what I would say about that is, I think on the one hand, plainly SAGs are often dealing with decisions that relate to wider public interest, and in those circumstances one might make an argument that there would be a reason for elected representatives to be involved. But equally, and I think it's a good point made by the Chair, this is not just a question of ensuring that right is done, it is also ensuring that the appearance of right is done. And I think my personal preference would be that on balance, elected representatives would be best not attending safety advisory groups.
Thank you. Bel Ribiera-Addy.
Thank you, Chair. We had ministers publicly express their opinions on this decision. Do you think it was appropriate for the government to comment on operational decisions, I suppose, that have been made by an independent police force, or in any way do you think that the standard safety decisions were being politicised? And that's to you both.
That's a good question. I think you should ask the relevant individual who made such comments. From my perspective, the police operate in the public interest for the public good. We elect politicians. Politicians should be able to freely express their views. But from an operational policing perspective, sometimes when views are expressed quite publicly, particularly if views are given when, let's say, all the facts haven't been briefed in detail, sometimes what that does is it can increase reporting, it can also increase tension, and it can increase the level of threat and risk. And on the contrary side to that, my answer would be it can also serve to decrease reporting and to decrease the level of threat and risk. So very much that's an individual, I think, question that should be answered by an individual rather than a chief constable. We work in an environment whereby we're in an online 24/7 environment and we police in that way. We have to be able to just respond accordingly.
Just briefly, I think decision making and risk taking is very tricky. I think retrospective views without a full understanding of the information intelligence can cause tensions. I know that the NPCC lead for football policing has previously written to the Home Secretary and suggested that if government feel there is a role for ministers or government, particularly in events where there is some national significance, then it would need to be legislated for.
Mr Foster.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think I might just usefully read out the concluding remarks from the report of the Inspectorate of Justice from the Dutch report, because I think the words are quite pertinent to this particular issue, and it's the concluding paragraph in that particular report. And what it says is, I won't read the entire of the conclusion, but the relevant section of the paragraph says, "What's striking is the speed with which strong words were used in the aftermath of the events. Politicians, administrators and the media jumped to conclusions without a clear understanding of what had actually happened. They spoke of failed action, negligence, or conversely of an incomprehensible tolerance. Such judgments delivered before the facts are complete influence public sentiment and directly affect the police officers who were on the streets. Many of them work long shifts, sometimes exceeding 15 hours, in a dynamic that defies a single narrative. These events demonstrate the challenges of maintaining order in a society where local tensions are fueled by global conflicts. Digital appeals can mobilise groups with lightning speed, and expectations about police action can vary. Balancing enforcement and freedom remains a difficult task, especially when reality unfolds faster than preconceived scenarios. This requires a sharp assessment of the facts, a flexible approach in the moment, and careful reflection afterwards, not only on police action, but also on the speed with which judgments are made.
Thank you. I'm very conscious that we have just gone over our time and the Minister has arrived. So we have a few more questions, if it's okay for you to stay a little bit longer. And I turn to Robbie Moore.
Well, just following up on that, Police and Crime Commissioner, are you including the Prime Minister in that? Because the Prime Minister said that the decision to ban Israeli supporters was wrong and suggested that it was caused by anti-Semitism on our streets.
Well, I think I'm not sure I could put it better than the policing minister herself during the urgent questions on Monday last week, I believe. I mean, the policing minister said, in answer to a question asked by the chair of this committee, indeed, I might add, there were a series of different interactions and communications between the different groups in that period, as members would expect. There is a balance to be struck with the operational independence question. We need to get that right. It is not, in the instance referred to here, for the Home Secretary to march in and demand that the police say a certain thing or act a certain way. And I think that applies as equally to the Prime Minister as it applies to any of us as elected representatives.
Okay. And given the political sensitivity around this issue, and hence why we're all here today, the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner is, of course, to hold the Chief Constable to account and make sure that they're acting in the best interests of the public. Do you have full faith in the Chief Constable, in the decisions that have been made around this operational procedure?
I have, since the decision was made, since the decision of the SAG was made on the 16th of October, I made it very clear that following that decision, I asked for an immediate review of that decision. I wrote to the Chief Constable, I wrote to the SAG, and I wrote indeed to the Prime Minister about how we could work to attempt to collaborate and ensure that we could consider all possible options. Since that initial process took place, I have corresponded with the Chief Constable about a variety of different matters. I have obtained relevant background documentation in connection with this matter. I've had an opportunity to consider that documentation, and I've had conversations with the Chief Constable. And I can say that I do have confidence in the way that the Chief Constable has dealt with this matter. Now, since a week last Sunday, when there was some doubt cast on the credibility, the veracity of the intelligence that was relied upon, I have since written to the Chief Constable in similar terms to that of the Policing Minister in order to ask him to account for the credibility and the reliability and the provenance of that intelligence that was relied on from the Dutch police, and I've received a reply to the effect that the Chief Constable is satisfied with that evidence. And to date, I am satisfied with that. Now, I'm also in correspondence with the MPs who were particularly concerned about this particular issue, and indeed the MP who laid down the urgent question, and indeed the Shadow Home Secretary as well. And I'm in correspondence with them with a view to securing exactly what evidence it is that they wish to rely on in terms of their allegations. And we are in the process of exchanging correspondence about that. Now, once I have all of that information, I will then review the position further in the light of that additional information. I will also be having regard to the outcome of this committee. I will also be having regard to the outcome of the Home Secretary commissioned HMIC investigation, and I will also be convening a meeting of my Accountability and Governance Board on the 27th of January with a specific agenda item to deal with this particular issue. So the matter has not yet concluded, but to date I am confident and I am satisfied with the response that the Chief Constable has provided so far.
Thank you. I'm just keen to understand just the flow of information with the Home Office. What information was given, and maybe this is to the Chief Constable, was given by you and your officers or staff to officials and ministers at the Home Office, DCMS number 10, and when?
So the way that the information flows is usually via the UK FBU. So the group of individuals who work on behalf of the NPCC, so the National Police Chiefs Council, under Chief Constable Roberts, regularly liaise with Home Office colleagues. And I know from having spoken to the commanders that information, that conversation took place right at the outset. And that communications continued throughout this process itself. So that information is, it's tried, tested, it's a method of communication in terms of briefing. I don't know exactly.
Do you know when?
I've got I know some of the dates that those correspondence took place, but we can certainly come back to you with some finer detail on that if you require it.
That would be kind. And did your officers send notice of the decision to recommend the ban of the supporters to the Home Office before it went to the Safety Advisory Group?
I'm not sure about that, whether it did or it didn't before the Safety Advisory Group, but we certainly updated the Home Office in terms of our concerns and the risk assessment that we were undertaking, definitely.
It would be helpful for the committee to understand if that went to the Home Office before or after. And did you receive a response from the Home Office to ratify or give any view about the decision to recommend the ban?
We were in correspondence with the Home Office, and indeed, the commanders have spoke to the Home Office. But with regards to ratification, that's not something that they would do. Home Office officials don't sort of ratify the police operational decision. We would.
That's just saying the sitting is coming back. We've had a sitting suspended for some reason. It's not a vote, don't worry, we won't have to disappear. It will end shortly. I think these are the longest we ever have with bells. Maybe there's a fault with them.
Suspended. It's not suspended. This happened.
We don't normally have. Yeah. Okay, let's just keep. If we can try and keep. Oh, there we go. There.
Sorry, Mr.
So you were saying that the Home Office
told me. Yes, there was. He's just told me there was some correspondence. I think by the UK FBU on the 8th of October.
Okay, so just to answer the question now about the Home Office, did they respond with a view on the ban? Even if they didn't, you commented that they didn't.
No, I'm not aware of any response to that effect.
Not aware.
With a view.
Okay.
I'm very conscious of time. I say we do have the Minister here. We have a number of other points. Could we write to you with the remaining points that we still have outstanding? We would also appreciate minutes of the SAG meetings and any of the advice that was given, community impact assessment, etc. So we have full visibility and transparency of what was said to who by when, and we would really appreciate that. Can I thank you for your time today and for coming and being witnesses. I will call this part of the session to a close while we change over the witnesses. Order. Thank you.
Thank you.
Order, order. We now go on to panel 3 of today's session on the decision to ban away fans from the Aston Villa Maccabi Tel Aviv game. Can I thank the Minister for coming and welcome her to her first appearance in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee as a Home Office Minister, and Mr Clark as well. Perhaps you would like to introduce yourselves and then we'll get into questions.
I am Sarah Jones. I am the Minister for Policing. And used to be on the Home Affairs Select Committee, but it's much nicer on that side of the table.
I'm Richard Clark. I'm the Director General for Public Safety at the Home Office.
Thank you very much. We're going to start with questions with Paul Kohler.
Thank you, welcome. I want to return to something I quizzed you about in the House last week. According to the policing unit, the Home Office were made aware in the week beginning the 6th of October that banning the fans was a possibility, was being considered. What was the Home Office's reaction to that news?
So the Home Office was aware. It has, as a previous evidence session has talked about, its relationship with what was happening in terms of the West Midlands and the SAG and the decisions was via this body called the UK Football Policing Authority in the UK. FBU was the sort of interaction that the Home Office had. So the Home Office had asked a series of questions of that body and had been told that a range of options were being considered in terms of what that decision would be. I suspect we'll come back to this more, but one of the issues, I think, looking at it, is that the Home Office had no kind of formal role in the SAG or in the decision. We were asking for information, and Richard can talk more about what we asked for when, but we were asking for sort of information and to be kept up to date rather than having a view or a position or a role in that decision, and I think that's quite an interesting thing to sort of talk through a bit more.
But given that something as politically sensitive as a ban was being considered, why didn't the Home Office at that point say resources might be available if that's the issue? Because according to what we've heard from the Police and Crime Commissioner, no objection was raised at all, and no offer was made either.
Again, I'll bring in Richard in a minute on the timings of what happened when, but I think the fundamental point was that the Home Office position was to be a receiver of information. We were asking for information. DCMS were the same. We're asking for information. We're kind of part of the flow of information across government. And we did not have a role. So we did not get involved when a decision was a potential decision. We also didn't know when exactly the committee, the SAGs, were meeting. We didn't know which of those meetings was going to be a decision-making one. There were a sort of range of meetings that we were hearing about. We didn't know which one was going to make a decision. And we didn't have a function in that process.
Weren't alarm bells ringing? Something sensitive as this being on the cards? What was the liaison between you and DCMS?
Do you want to talk through the detail, sure, and then I can come back?
Yeah, sure. So my team were in regular contact with the UK Football Policing Unit to understand what was happening. As the Minister says, our role is primarily to understand the arrangements potentially being put in place. We were aware in that week of the 6th and 8th of October that one option being considered was the possibility of away fans not being allowed to come to the match, but that was one option being considered, and no decisions have been made at that point. You asked about resources. The standard process, the usual process, is that forces come to the Home Office if they think they're facing the likelihood of having to make an application to what's called the special grant process. So if a force faces a significant pressure that they don't think they can absorb within their own funding that's unexpected, they can put an application in to the Home Office. Forces are all well aware of how they would do that, and we have a tried and tested approach to doing so. So we didn't at that point explicitly go to the force and say, would you like to make a special grant application? But that was a standard process that was open and available to them.
Even though that might influence their decision, given it was so politically sensitive. I'm not quite sure why you're being told about it, unless you can have some input. It's just interesting to be told this. What is your role?
So our role is to ensure that we understand the context that's operating out in different matches, to be ready to respond if a request is made by a force for specific support, and to ensure that we have a good understanding of the matches and events likely to come up.
It's utterly passive. You don't see your role as, look, this is clearly politically sensitive. Can we say offer resource if that will help solve the issue, help you address the problem?
So that was absolutely what we were saying to the force over the weekend after the decision was made. Prior to that point, no decision had been made.
You knew it was on the cards.
But all options were on the table, we were told, right up until indeed on the 15th of October, we were told by the UK Football Policing Unit that all options were being considered.
But I go back to my point. You knew it was on the cards, that the fact that you could have offered resources might have helped make a different decision. Given it was so politically sensitive, why be so passive? Why not take a proactive role and say, look, we see this is politically sensitive, we see the issues here, we could offer resource. Well, why would that not be done?
I think our assessment was that the force knew that option was available to them and would have come to us if it was available. They could absolutely request, yeah.
Rest, but they couldn't be guaranteed they would get it.
And if I can come in here, there is a kind of, in terms of when police forces want mutual aid, want support for matches, the request doesn't normally come via us, it would come into the wider policing system, so we wouldn't necessarily be part of that process. As Richard said, I asked for information on the 15th. We got information back that said there was possibly a meeting on the 20th, it was possibly going to be the following day. It was still very unclear quite what was happening and whether decisions were going to be made at that point. And I think the actions that we took subsequently should help us navigate a way through this, firstly by asking HMIC FRS to do a review, which the Home Secretary has asked them to do, both to look at the intelligence that was gathered and to report on that by the end of this year, so by the 31st of December, but also on the wider point of how policing intelligence feeds into this SAG process and how that works. As we said in the House, the SAG committees were set up after Hillsborough, and I think there's a kind of legitimate question about when matches are of deep significance nationally for kind of wider issues, as this one very much was. Is there a role, is there a different way that we should navigate these things? And of course Louise Casey, when she did her a review for the Football Association in 2021, she said that you should designate some football matches, some events of sort of national significance, and you should have a different structure. And at the heart of this is the argument about police operational independence and about government involvement. And we're grappling with this in the reform agenda that we're working on now with the Home Secretary. You don't ever want to be in a situation where you are telling the police what they should be reporting in terms of safety. I mean, that way, you know, is wrong. But when you do have events that are so nationally significant, globally significant, is it right that government has no formal role in those decisions? And that is what HMRC FRS are going to look at, and we're going to have a look at what Louise Casey suggested.
And were you liaising with DCMS? Were you talking about this together? What were those conversations?
We were, yes. Yeah, so that team liaises with DCMS regularly, and there was contact during that week with DCMS colleagues. It's important to say that we manage the primary contact point with the UK FPU in the Home Office, but we were keeping DCMS colleagues.
What was the result of that discussion? Just
the importance of making sure that we understood what the plans were that were being developed by the safety, or developed by West Midlands Police and being considered by the Safety Advisory Group, which, as I say, right up until the decision was announced, we believed all options to be on the table.
Olivia Radi.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Sorry, my notes are frozen. I wanted to ask, Same question I asked to the officers, actually. There were a number of cabinet members that actually expressed their decision, that their opinions on this particular decision. And do you think it's appropriate for the government to be commenting on operational decisions made by independent police forces, or that in any way that may have affected the standard safety decisions?
I think there is a big difference between commenting after a decision has been made and before, and no comment was made in the run-up to the decision. It wouldn't have been right, nor did we try or even think about trying to sort of influence what the police may have to say about the safety of a match. But once the decision had been made, the Prime Minister was very clear in what he said. And I think the view to the world at that point, rightly or wrongly, was that Jews weren't welcome in this country, and we couldn't, the Prime Minister did not want to let that be the view of the government. He wanted to be really clear that we should not have a situation where Jewish fans were not able to come to this country. So what that triggered, once that decision had been made, the Prime Minister had responded, was a weekend of activity chaired by DCMS as the sort of lead across government on this, multiple meetings across government, conversations with the police that Richard did, that basically said, what would it take for this match to be able to go ahead? What would it take? Let's talk about this. Let's talk about all of your concerns. Let's talk about all of the information. Let's talk about money if that's what we need to talk about. But what would it take to enable that match to go ahead? And we were in that mode of trying to come to a solution when the Maccabi team said that the fans would not be coming, so that the process changed again at that point.
Thank you. And what was the evidential basis on which the government said that it should be overturned overall? Was there any political element to this?
I think, as I said, the Prime Minister was expressing a view that, rightly or wrongly, people thought that Jewish people were not being welcomed into our country to watch a football match. Of course, this decision, and this speaks to the challenge that we have in looking at these issues, this decision was not made in a vacuum, and indeed the police chiefs know they didn't make the decision in a vacuum. There's a wider context of rising anti-Semitism, of conflict and people having very strong positions on Israel and Gaza and all of these things into which this decision was made. And that was why he intervened in the way that he did. And that's why we then said, okay, you've made this decision, actually let's look at it, let's try and work together and see if there's something we could do to make this work. Now, the outcome, obviously, I think that people wanted it over that weekend was what can we do to make it possible that the fans come. There were still other sort of options being looked at then as well as to whether a smaller number of fans, all of these issues could be looked at. So you had MHCLG, you had the Treasury, you had DCMS, you had the Home Office, and you had us having conversations with the Chief Constable to sort of say, you know, tell us what it would take to make us able to do this safely.
Were there any discussions, I suppose, on the communications surrounding this, as opposed to it being that Jewish fans were not welcome at a football match, these particular fans not being welcome at the football match? Was there any discussions about perhaps putting that view across?
In terms of whether it was the kind of hooligan element,
yeah.
Do you mean? Yeah. I mean, I think one of the struggles that we had with this process was that we didn't actually know and have the information as to why decisions had been made within the SAG, and you've talked about this in previous evidence. What the SAG does, how it operates, is not something that we weren't in that process. We weren't hearing what the reasons were, so we didn't have access to all of the information that the SAG had access to. And of course there's the kind of hooligan element, there's the community cohesion element, and then there's the wider context into which all of this lands, all of which is important. We didn't know we didn't know that detail. So over the weekend, I think there were lots of intensive conversations. You can speak to them more. I was involved on the Friday. There was a call with the Home Secretary and officials and advisors, and then there was this weekend of 2 or 3 meetings a day to try and work through a process to get to an end point. But then it became irrelevant because then the fans, the Israeli team said they weren't going to bring their fans anyway.
And did the government have any access to intelligence which contradicted what the West Midlands police had in their risk assessment?
We neither had the risk assessment nor any intelligence. No.
So I suppose what was the basis on saying that what they had decided was wrong?
Because, as I said, the decision sent a message which the Prime Minister could not accept, which was that Jewish people would not be welcome to come to this match. And he was very clear that we needed to look again at that. I think the Police and Crime Commissioner then, on that decision, also wrote to the SAG wrote that the SAG should meet again. I think Lisa Nandy, the Secretary of State, there was a statement, I think, the following Monday where she said the same. So we were all sort of in the same place, but I think it was the Monday evening that the decision was made not for the fans not to come anyway.
And fans have previously been banned in the UK. I think most notably Celtic and Rangers fans were actually banned from visiting each other's grounds between 2023 and 2025. I mean, on what basis would you say that was right or wrong? Just for consistency?
Well, I think obviously the wider context in this is very important, and there are some contested sort of facts and figures that we don't have answers to at the moment. I mean, I would say as a wider point, policing football matches is really hard. Policing protests is really hard, and the police pretty much do a really good job in what is very difficult. And when I've been involved in conversations as the shadow policing minister about protests for a long time, and West Midlands Police is often held up as an example of managing these things well, actually, in terms of the work that it does to get us to a point where conditions are put in place and community sort of engagement is done to a point where you can navigate your way through protests. And I think in the main, the police do a very good job policing football matches in very difficult circumstances. I think there are several issues here that we need to unpick. One is the particular issue about intelligence and what was the right intelligence and what was the wrong intelligence, to which we don't have an answer. But the second is this system set up to fail? and actually, do we need to look at a different system? And we've asked HMRC FRS to look at that for us to see whether we are putting local bodies in an impossible position when they're having to make a decision that has a much wider a much wider impact.
Thank you.
Peter Prinsley.
Thank you very much. Peter Prinsley, Bury St Edmunds, Stowmarket. So I think what I'm sort of picking up here is that the government was put in a position to having to deal with the problem after a decision had been made. So the SAG in Birmingham decided that the football match should not go, or the fans from Israel should not come. And then by the time you were alerted to it, we then had a sort of political catastrophe, because we've got a situation in which, as you say, the Prime Minister had to come forward and say we can't have a situation in this country where Jews are not welcome at football matches, in the wider context of what was going on with anti-Semitism all over the country. And so it seems to me that there was a sort of political link that was missing here. And I think you alluded to the way in which the SAG works for an event such as this. And do you think that there should have been there should have been deeper political thinking going on in Birmingham and in the SAG? Perhaps because we know that some of the members of the SAG are politically elected individuals. Do you not think it would have been appropriate for some of them to have realised what the consequences of this decision were, and that there should have been contact with people in government before this announcement was made?
Again, to put it in the context, the SAG has its terms of reference and does what it does, part of that role is not you need to alert central government when there's a problem coming. Equally, we knew in the Home Office that this was happening, that there were several options being looked at, one of which was this option to not allow fans to come. And again, we had no role, and actually it was a hugely political, it was a very important decision. So what that says to me going forward is we need to look at whether this structure is the right structure.
Joe White. Following the announcements that the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans were going to be banned, what contact did you have with West Midlands Police?
Well, you were the one over the weekend that was having the contact. Obviously, from we heard about the decision. I should be clear, when we read about it when I think Aston Villa tweeted about it first, because it's their decision. So they about 5:15 tweeted, and that's when we first knew about it. Obviously there was a kind of initial, taking in that information, and then there was this weekend of very active engagement with the police and with other government departments. But I don't know if you want to speak to your engagement.
Yeah, so I spoke to the Chief Constable several times over that weekend, as did members of my team. We were also discussing at more operational level. In addition to the small team that I have that liaise directly with the National Football Policing Unit, we also have a team that specialises in liaising with police forces during particularly important moments. They were brought in to support as well, so they were talking individually to their kind of counterparts in West Midlands Police. Throughout that entire weekend, my and the other civil servants involved, number one priority was to achieve the government's objective, which was that this match should go ahead with fans able to be present from both teams. And so the conversations we were having with the police were about understanding the sequence of work that they were doing to think about alternative options, the likely timings of SAG meetings, which continued to be a source of some discussion right up until the Monday evening, exactly when those SAG meetings were going to take place. And importantly, I emphasised to the police that it was the government's position, and that I was mandated to say this, as it were, that there should be no kind of element of self-censoring in relation to resources. So we wanted to know what it would take for the match to be able to go ahead. Now, clearly, the operational planning of that, the options being considered, had to be developed by the police themselves. We took no part in kind of operational planning in that sense. Our job was to make sure we understood what the options were that were being considered, and that we were both ready to respond quickly to any requests for resources, and also had made very clear to the police and partners that we would consider those options if they were to come to us.
And did you set a time frame for obviously there's a whole series of processes you talk about the future SAG meetings? Was there a time frame for that decision made?
So we didn't set a time frame because that decision ultimately had to be made by the SAG.
Yes.
We said, I remember very clearly over that weekend saying, we would obviously want that decision to be made as quickly as possible, but on the other hand, we completely recognise that the police and partners would need to work through the options they would need to do to be able to come up with potential alternative policing plans. We were available and indeed working throughout that weekend, and were ready to respond immediately if requests came in or alternative options were being considered. And as the Minister says, we were doing that right up to the point at which the decision was made by Maccabi Tel Aviv not to draw down on the allocations.
Yeah, so everything else we can say is entirely trying to talk about bits that never actually happened. But what would have happened if the SAG still had said no? How could we overcome a SAG decision?
Well, we were fully focused on making sure that that the match was able to go ahead with fans present. That was our absolute focus over that weekend.
And obviously the process of the SAG is that ultimately you have to have a safety certificate that the match can go ahead.
Yes.
So that was what we were working towards, is how do we manage to get that safety certificate. And I didn't mention before, I should have done, that the Cabinet Office is doing a piece of work as well, looking at the terms of reference of the SAG alongside the review that the inspector's doing, which is about the police's sort of input into the SAG. The Cabinet Office is doing a bit of work just to, I say a bit of work, that's probably underplaying what it is. Their resilience team are doing some work to look at the guidance on how SAGs should operate.
I asked the police and the police crime commissioner earlier, do you think SAGs should be politically independent, not have political representatives on them?
I think it's a difficult one to answer, and I think we obviously need to look at the role of them, and obviously, well, we're looking through the inspectorate in the bit that we sort of have oversight of, which is the police's kind of involvement into the SAG. Looking at the wider SAG is a kind of wider question. I think it does. Sometimes we talk about political input, and different people mean different things. I mean, I guess we're saying what we don't want is for a decision of safety and security to be made incorrectly because of involvement from one organisation or another. That could be political, could be others, could be other people having a view about other things. I think the principle after Hillsborough, which, as we know, was a absolute tragedy, and we needed to make sure football matches were safe. The principle is you bring together all the bodies, the emergency services, the local community sort of organisations together to have that conversation, and that's a good principle. On this occasion, because it had such a bigger sort of national, international dimension, you kind of think, do we need something of the like of what Louise Casey has suggested or Lord Mann has suggested in terms of bringing together of a sort of slightly different group of people to also feed into the decision.
Cola.
I'm struggling with the logic here. Before the decision was made, you're kept fully informed that you take this sort of vow of silence that you won't actually get involved. The moment the decision is made, and it's far more difficult, you then have rightly see the right to facilitate a change of decision. If you can offer that facilitation after the decision is made, why can't you offer it beforehand when it's far less difficult to actually get to the preferred outcome?
I think there's a number of things there. One is that we weren't sure when the SAG was meeting, who was on it, on what basis they were making the decision. We're not in that conversation. Should we have seen the political implication of this earlier? Quite possibly. We are looking at. We have already looked at our sort of processes in terms of raising issues within the Home Office, but the reason that didn't happen is because there wasn't a role for the Home Office. It wasn't because people didn't realise that it was a significant match. It was because we had no role in that decision-making process.
There's no role afterwards, but you inserted yourself in because it was so political. You don't have a role at any point in that, but you inserted yourself in because it was so political. Isn't reality either you took your eye off the ball or were complacent about what was happening?
I don't think we were complacent at all. I think the reality of our role is one that is now being looked at through HMRC FRS. They're looking at what is the role of police into this system. We're also looking at what's the role of the Home Office in terms of policing decisions. The whole police reform agenda is an interesting one. As we know, back in 2012, when police and crime commissioners were set up, the role of the Home Office was to step back from a lot of these issues and not to be hands-on in a way that we were before. We're looking through the reform agenda. Is that balance right? Do we need to shift it? So you make a reasonable point in terms of what is our role and when should we be stepping in, but I can't overstate how hard it is for a decision like this, because the operational independence of the police is so important. If we were charging in and telling them before they'd made a decision, before they had a position, and then something catastrophic happened, then clearly that would not be something we would want. So we have to get this balance right.
Oh, I see that completely. From what you said earlier, though, you do accept perhaps the political implications weren't fully considered. You do accept that.
I think there was information flows within the civil service, within the department, within the private offices, and we were acting in our role, which was to sort of ask for information, to receive information. It was being passed around with DCMS and others. And I don't think we could have publicly had a role at that point because the decision hadn't been made. I don't think that would have been right.
Robbie Moore.
I mean, just to expand on this, it all seems a bit of a mess. So we have a scenario where a decision has been made by West Midlands Police. The Home Office are notified by that decision, but or the direction of that decision being made, but yet a feeling that the Home Office can't step in. But then the Prime Minister ultimately comes out and says that that the decision to ban Israeli supporters was completely wrong. So I would say that there is an element of a role that the Home Office should be politically sensitive to in terms of the social cohesion implications of decisions that are being made.
Well, just to be clear, I mean, no decision was made before the decision was made. The police put the advice into the SAG. The SAG makes a decision that then the local authority is the ultimate body responsible for giving the safety certificate, and then it was the decision of Aston Villa to not allow the fans or to say there'd be no away fan tickets. That was an Aston Villa decision. So we didn't know that decision until 5:17 on the day itself when the decision had been made, and Aston Villa tweeted about it. So no decision had been made up to that point. We knew that there were options on the table, and we knew that it was likely that there'd be a ban on the fans, but we didn't know there was also other options being considered of smaller number of fans being allocated, or the match being held behind closed doors with no fans, or the match being held somewhere else. All these things were sort of
At what point were any concerns raised by the Home Office? Was any concerns raised by the Home Office when there was an understanding that the ban would follow through?
No, you go.
I was just going to say, so we contacted the UK Football Policing Unit on a number of occasions, in particular between the 8th and or in that week of the 6th, 8th and 15th. On the 15th of October, we contacted the UK FPU expressly following the policing minister asking us to check what the latest was, and at that point were told all options were still on the table, and it wasn't confirmed yet at that point when we spoke to UKFPU exactly when the next SAG meeting was going to be, or whether that next SAG meeting would take a decision. So we were in contact with the UKFPU in order to understand the options being considered. We were expressly not seeking to interfere in that decision, but we do want to understand it in order to be able to properly brief ministers. And we're told on the 15th that all options were still being considered.
And was there any line of communication directly with the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner on this?
Not that I'm aware of, certainly not from my team.
And I mean, I'll ask the same question to the policing minister as I did to the Police and Crime Commissioner. In your view of the Chief Constable's decisions, that ultimately, do you feel that do you have full faith in the Chief Constable in terms of the decisions, operational decisions that he was making, and ultimately the conclusion that was reached?
Well, I think firstly, as I said before, West Midlands Police has been held up as an example of good practice over the years in terms of how it handles protests, community cohesion, all of those. In relation to this, there is a contested issue around the intelligence, which obviously you spoke at length to him about, which we are waiting on. But that is the only contested point at this time.
So reserving a judgment yet, is that the conclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I have only been the policing minister for a few weeks, but have met with him and met with, indeed, the Police and Crime Commissioner on, different issues where we work very well together. They do a very good job. There is a contested issue that we are waiting for, which is why we've asked HMIC FRS to look at this at pace and come back to us before the end of December.
Just to be absolutely clear on the timeline, you were first alerted that there were concerns around this match when?
So the first time we were aware of potential concerns was in early September.
It was early September, so the match was announced in the August, I think. That's when UEFA said when the fixtures would be. And early September, there was a notification that there were concerns around this match.
Potential concerns,
right. And how much of that was based on Lord Mann's previous report to you on the what had happened at the Ajax game?
So some of that concern in early September was based on Lord Mann's concerns about what had happened in the Ajax game.
And when was it made clear to you that West Midlands Police were going to recommend? So my understanding is their recommendation went to the SAG that the match could go ahead if no away fans were there. When were you aware that was West Midlands Police's recommendation?
We never knew that for sure.
We never knew that. We never knew until after the announcement that the decision had been made that was the definitive answer. That we heard about that on the 16th, along with everyone else. On the 15th, my team spoke to the UK Football Policing Unit, who said that all options were still being considered.
Okay. Did you at any point say it would be incredibly bad politically if the fans were not able to attend?
No, we were focused on ensuring that we understood the options that were being considered.
And was number 10 alerted to any of this prior to the 16th?
Yes, we were in touch with number 10 at points throughout that.
Number 10
process.
were aware there was a possibility away fans would be banned from this match.
I'd have to check the exact point at which we were speaking to number 10, but I'd need to check that.
If you could, we'd appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Of course.
There was a point as well at the start of October, which is when it became clear, because there had been a question that UEFA might vote to exclude, which I think people were waiting for a bit. And on the 2nd of October, it became apparent that wasn't going to be the case. So that was also a kind of date of significance, I think.
Nicola.
You had Lord Mann's report. He tells us he didn't get much from you. West Midlands Police tell us they didn't see Lord Mann's report. Given it was so important to the decision, or what it covered was clearly critical to the decision, or relevant, why didn't you sort of inform West Midlands Police about the report? Would that not have been a useful thing to do?
Well, our understanding at the time had been that the UK Football Policing Unit did have access to Lord Mann's report, so we believed they did.
Okay.
You see, he met with my predecessor, the policing minister. He met with my predecessor, the policing minister, and the action that we weren't there, but the action from that was that the UK FBU were to work with Lord Mann as we understand it. But Lord Mann will know whether that happened or not.
We're coming on to our final set of questions, so we will get you out by past, which I know is your hard stop. Peter Prinsley.
I just want to ask the question that I've asked the other two panels before you came in. And this, I think, goes to the heart of the matter and the thing that most concerns the Jewish community, which is whether you believe there's any suspicion, well, there is a suspicion, but is there any reason to suppose that there was political interference in the decision to ban the supporters, and this was the result of a prejudiced assessment of the advice and information which was received?
I mean, I don't think I can comment on that because I don't know. I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that there was prejudice, but nor have I seen all of the information. So I think that's why we're asking HMRC FRS to look at the intelligence that was, there were lots of different sort of views as to what happened in that Amsterdam match and different bits of information. So we need to get to the bottom of that. I think the point at which the Prime Minister intervened was right, whether there was or not, there wasn't, that is the perception, and we can't have that. So we have to, and we are, the backdrop of this is rising anti-Semitism, and we'd had on the 2nd of October the Manchester attack, and the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister both very clear that, you know, we need to do absolutely everything we can to stamp out anti-Semitism wherever it is. You know, that is a guiding principle that sits behind a lot of what we're doing, why we're providing more funding for synagogues, why we're working so closely with colleagues from the Jewish community. But I can't literally answer the question that you've asked because I don't have the information.
No. Oh, well, thank you for that. That's a very candid response. I understand that there's a brief that has been given to a chief inspector in reviewing football policing, and my question is, what are you hoping to achieve with the review?
Yep.
And then we have just spoken about this. We think that the SAG process probably isn't working right, and you have said that you're looking at that too. But what do you think specifically this review of football policing will achieve?
So this inspection is specifically on the input that police forces make into the safety advisory groups. It's looking at what is their risk appetite in terms of advice and assessment, the degree to which they look at community impacts as part of these decisions, beyond a sort of narrow community safety sort of element, whether the balance is correct in terms of what they're looking at and how forces then communicate their decisions. Subsequently to the Home Secretary commissioning this work, which she did on the 31st of October, and provided £200,000 for the inspector to be able to do that, she's subsequently written asking that he also considers the information and intelligence which informed the match assessment. So this is following this contested space that we have of what the intelligence was or what it wasn't, and on that he's going to report by the 31st of December, and on the wider issue by March.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to conclude, so in summary of what we've found out today, a decision was taken which the Home Office were aware might be taken but were offering support and said that resources would be available, but that doesn't appear to have been taken into account in the final decision. But it was all based on this contested assessment of the intelligence from what happened at the Ajax game, where we've got Lord Mann's report saying one thing, we've got this intelligence report from the Chief Inspector of West Midlands Police saying something else, and then we've got other things coming through now from the Dutch police. Did it cross anyone's mind at the Home Office to just challenge the intelligence assessment? And given the sensitivity of this matter, was there anyone in the Home Office said, can we just double check that this intelligence is right?
I, at that time, didn't have Lord Mann's report. I didn't have access to any intelligence, and I didn't know what the SAG was making its decision based on. I mean, other than it's, you know, it has a terms of reference where it looks at several things. I didn't have access to that information. That is a question, should I have done within the confines of operational independence, and that's why the Home Secretary has asked us to look at this recommendation from Louise Casey that we have when they are matches of such significant interest, that we have a slightly different model. Now that in itself will be very difficult to work through, but I mean we need to look at that because I think it's a valid question to ask what we should have had access to and what we shouldn't.
You didn't have the document that cited the West Ham game, for example. You didn't have sight of that before this decision. You didn't have sight of the document that cited the West Ham game that never happened. You didn't have sight of that.
We saw that when it was published.
We didn't see that prior to the 16th. No. And our focus on that weekend then was about making sure that we could put in place or facilitate in any way that we could as the government facilitate the match going ahead with fans being present from both teams.
Thank you very much. Is there anything you want to add before we conclude?
I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate you came at short notice to assist us in our deliberations. I will conclude the session now. So order. Thank you.